observe Palm Sunday. Happy Passover to those of you observing Passover. Happy whatever holiday it is to whatever people observe that particular holiday. Sunday evening shout out. If you're one of those people like me who has work tomorrow, my deep condolences on that. But hey, whatever, we're all happy to be living our lives. It's Sunday night, and I'm on here to have a chat with all of you. So glad to share this lovely evening with you. Hit the like button, please. Hit the subscribe button, please. Hit the notifications bell, please. And if you want me to talk about some things, send me a super chat, please. Hey, the super chats make the show. I've got my opening remarks to give you. I've got my opening remarks, and then from there, we'll do our roll call, and then from there, I will answer your super chat questions. So it's going to be a lovely evening. So I'm really happy to have the opportunity to engage with all of you. Thanks for tuning in. Great community we've got here. If you haven't had a chance, check out the great web conference we had last night for the Center for Political Innovation. Dynamic. Dust James gave an amazing opener, and from there we heard from Delaney and Ariel about the struggles of women, and in particular about people in the U.S. military who are getting interested in communism. Dynamic. We heard from Justin Simons, a very long, complex, and good presentation on the history of NATO and the NATO coalition, where the NATO treaty came from, the mythology of the West. Very dynamic. So go check out the CPI web conference from last night. Very, very powerful, good stuff. So glad to have that web conference. And yeah, good things are happening. I do want to let you know that our next patrons-only stream will be happening on Wednesday. Our next patrons-only stream is on Wednesday. So if you want to be part of that, it's not too late to sign up below and become a patron. If you want to be part of the patrons-only stream where I just get on here and chat with all of you and answer your questions, by all means, now is the time to sign up and get in before that patrons-only stream. That'll be happening on Wednesday. Wednesday is the time of the next patrons-only stream, so if you want to become a supporter, go below. If there's a topic you want me to get to in the second half of our show, by all means, send me a super chat. And, what is it from the Aladdin movie with put all your hands and arms inside the carpet and away we go. I'll just jump right into my opening remarks. Folks, I don't like to do this, right? If there's something that everybody on the left internet is talking about, I generally try to stay away from such a topic, right? I don't want to be a bandwagon socialist. I don't want to talk about things because I heard about them on another socialist stream, or heard about it on another socialist stream, or heard about it on another socialist stream. I don't like to be like that. I always try to give you guys unique material, unique analysis, unique perspectives. I try not to be a bandwagon kind of guy. I try to give you something you can't get anywhere else, a unique, dynamic product. I don't sit here with a microphone and be like, these bleeping corporations don't pay bleeping taxes, and Donald Trump is a bleeping fascist. Can you believe what a bleeping fascist he is? And Jordan Peterson's a bleeping moron, and bleep, and I don't do that, right? Because there's plenty of people doing that. If you want to watch some young millennial or Zoomer leftist kids sit there and curse about Republicans being dumb, by all means, you can do that. You can get that everywhere. But I try to give you something unique. However, I am gonna now, for my opening remarks at least, give my particular take on a very, very trendy topic to talk about. It's the talk of the town. All of Left Book is up in arms about the latest interview with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, published in Democratic Left, the publication of the Democratic Socialists of America. Everyone's up in arms about it. I saw a guy I really like, a comedian, Peter Coffin, was streaming about it. Lee Camp was streaming about it. Everyone's streaming about it. And even though I resist the urge to jump on the bandwagon, I am going to give you a piece of my mind about the AOC interview. I absolutely loved it. I thought it was, I'm just kidding. Okay. Yeah. I was just messing with you. No, I didn't like it. I didn't like it one bit. Now, for those of you who didn't see it coming, I was not impressed with AOC's interview published in Democratic Left. Not a big fan. Not a big fan. Um, Not a big fan. Labor history. Good idea. Labor history. Draw people to communism. When I saw that interview with AOC, the way she was talking, and it reminds me of a number of things she said on Twitter over the years, reminds me of a number of statements she's made to the media. And, you know, it's not just a problem with her. Okay, she is definitely not where we're at all. She's not a revolutionary. I wouldn't say she's really a socialist. I mean, at this point, I don't see her advocating the banks, factories, and industries being organized by the people. She's not for what Eugene Debs was for. She's certainly not for what William Z. Foster and Gus Hall were for. She's not for what the Black Panthers were for. She's not even for what Dr. Martin Luther King was for in the final years of his life. I mean, she's not advocating actual socialism. So, I mean, I wouldn't really call her a socialist. But the arguments that she was making, the problems with the logic she was using in that interview, the problems with it are not just a problem with her. They are a problem with the entire organized political left. She is simply a product of decades of distortion, political confusion. So essentially, for those of you who don't want to go and actually read the interview, which, I mean, to be fair, I will allow people to go and read the interview. I mean, I will allow it. I will not ban you from doing so. But no, I would encourage people, go return to source. Get it from the horse's mouth. I mean, don't take my word for it. If you read it and get something else out of the interview, good. I'm not going to discourage you from actually going and checking out the actual interview. But yeah, the essence of the interview is that it's basically all about how great DSA is, why you should join DSA. The first reason that she loves DSA is because they don't engage in quote unquote class essentialism. They don't engage in class essentialism. They're actually getting things done by trying to elect Democrats, number one. And then furthermore, people that are critical of people that are privileged critique, and they are bad face actors. And look, the interview is all about how DSA is this amazing group that she discovered when she was a community organizer, because they're amazing, because they're not. Basically, if you read between the lines, what she's saying is this. Actual revolutionary ideology, actual Marxism, class struggle, these are all, nerdy, autistic, divorced from the masses, divorced from actual organizing, armchair revolutionary things to do. And that what we don't need ideology, we don't need, real organizers, or we don't Marxism, we just need quote unquote activism. Can crypto help fund the socialist revolution? Basically what she's saying is, that hey, if you actually want socialism, if you don't think that voting for Joe Biden was the answer, if you don't see Joe Biden's victory as a victory over reaction, you are an ultra-left armchair revolutionary, and thank goodness DSA isn't like that. They're not class essentialists, and it's a privileged critique. It's something that only like white males would do. And real people of color really benefit from electing Joe Biden. So how dare you? How dare you say that? You're a bad faith actor. It's not good stuff. Not good stuff. But folks, there's nothing new about this. I have been hearing this stuff for years. I have been hearing this kind of social democratic, anti-communist, anti-class struggle, liberal rhetoric for years, right? I was, and I've heard it. I was never a member of the DSA. I've never been in the DSA, right? I was a member of a certain group for 8 years. And in that group, I heard it. I was informed by somebody who'd been a member of the supposedly Marxist-Leninist party I was in for many decades. I was informed, quote, only white people are interested in communism. I remember thinking that is so wrong. So wrong. And I was informed that, that quote, real activists aren't interested in that shit. I was informed of that many times. Real activists are not interested in that Marx and Lenin shit, right? That only white people and autistic white males are interested in Marxism. It's white privilege to talk about Marxism and class struggle because real working class people and people of color in their communities are struggling to get by and they don't have time for your revolutionary shit. I've heard that kind of stuff for years, and I heard it from people that were in Marxist-Leninist groups. Look, I mean, with all due respect, there's good people in all of these groups, but there are a number of tanky ML parties where that kind of language will be used very frequently. Think about Fanny Wright, often regarded as the first female successor to Tom involvement in the Workmen's Party. Fanny Wright, Workingmen's Party. And, this stuff is out there. And really what this is, it's not new at all. This is Edward Bernstein. Edward Bernstein, a leader of the Marxist movement in the 1800s, he famously came out with the slogan, "The movement is everything, the goal is nothing." The movement is everything, the goal is nothing. All right? It's not about actually having a socialist revolution. It's just about the struggle. It's about the movement. It's about the struggle. It's not about actually having socialism or achieving socialism. The movement is everything. The day-to-day struggles are everything. The actual goal is nothing. And Edward Bernstein, a leader of the Marxist movement, when he came out with these theories that capitalism just kind of naturally evolves into socialism, there is no revolutionary event horizon, that socialism is nothing but the mere sum of reforms, that capitalism is just kind of naturally turning into socialism. The fact that there is universal male suffrage means that because of that, all the males who can vote, who are working class, there's more of them than there are capitalists, so they'll just outvote the capitalists. That imperialism is progressive because it's spreading the most advanced system. These ideas are not new. Edward Bernstein came out with these ideas, and he called it revisionism. And that was not a slur. That's what he called himself. Edward Bernstein, the leader of Marxists in the 1800s, he said, the movement is everything. The goal is nothing. Socialism is nothing but, quote, the sum of reforms. Imperialism is progressive because it's bringing the more advanced Western system to the third world. And the movement, i.e. day-to-day reforms, is everything. But the goal, actually overthrowing capitalism, is nothing. That's revisionism. That is the definition of revisionism. But the particular form of revisionism, I guess you could call it, you could call it movementism or movementarianism, right? The idea that actual, biography of Mao, that actual communist theory and ideology doesn't matter, and that all that matters is kind of day-to-day struggles. That has been around a long time. And here's the problem with it. You ready for the problem with it? All of the reforms that movementarians celebrate and say we should only focus on organizing for, and that we should not talk about communism, not talk about revolution, but focus on winning these reforms, every single one of those reforms was won by communists. Right? The 8-hour workday in this country was achieved during the 1930s when communist revolution was on the agenda, when an ideological Marxist party called the Communist Party had millions of people aligned with it and was leading huge strikes and protests. All these reforms that are so important happened at a time when revolutionary organizations that did talk about these things, that did advocate the overthrow of capitalism, that did teach Marxist ideology were very strong. The Black Panthers. Watch the Fred Hampton, the movie The Murder of Fred Hampton. Listen to the speeches of Fred Hampton. He was all about Marxism. He was all about revolution. He was all about class struggle. And the Black Panther organization, you talk about all that they achieved in terms of racial justice. It wasn't achieved because they said, let's never talk about communism. No, they had mandatory reading of the Little Red Book. They sent delegations to meet with Gaddafi, and they were really big, strong admirers of North Korea and of China. It's just simply not the case. You can go back to the 1800s, the IWW that was around in, the early 1900s, the Industrial Workers of the World. They were a revolutionary organization that studied Marx, that had an anarcho-syndicalist ideology. It's been said many times, people have pointed out, they've said, well, you couldn't have had Dr. Martin Luther King without Malcolm X, right? That the reason the establishment was willing to cooperate in some ways with Dr. Martin Luther King is because Malcolm X, the more radical figure, was there, and that you needed Malcolm X to make Dr. Martin Luther King. And that's very true. That is very, very true. And that this notion that revolutionaries don't actually change things, that we just stand on the sidelines shouting revolution into our pillows, at night, screaming revolution into our pillows at night, and it's social democrats and people who vote for the Democratic Party who actually change things is a lie. It's an absolute lie. I don't know. That's an interesting question. Masonic origins. It's an absolute lie. It's simply not the case, right? That reforms in this country are largely the result of the threat of socialist revolution around the world. They're the result of the activism of revolutionary groups in the United States, and that the best mass organizers in U.S. history have been revolutionaries, right? That's just a fact. It is just a fact. The best mass organizers in U.S. society have been revolutionaries, and tankies, no less. Look, the Black Panthers, they were hardline tankies. Red Mao, met with North Korea, pro-Cuba. They wore uniforms, for goodness sakes. They marched in formation. They had required political education classes. They were disciplined. They did the fist salute. They were basically everything. Everything. Okay, I heard you, Joseph. They're everything that the synthetic left doesn't like. They dressed in uniforms. They marched in a disciplined way. They studied ideology. God forbid. They were aligned with anti-imperialist states. Goodness gracious. The civil rights movement really began with the Civil Rights Congress, which was organized by the Communist Party. W.E.B. Du Bois, who praised Stalin excessively, met with Mao, praised China's liberation of the Tibetan people from feudalism. W.E.B. Du Bois, the founder of the Civil Rights Movement. Read his autobiography, where he talks excessively about communism and why he's a communist. You know, I mean, my goodness. So many of the greatest names. Albert Einstein openly advocated, the banks, factories, and industries being organized to serve public good and not profits. He wrote a beautiful essay called "Why Socialism." So many great mass organizers have been hardliners and tankies. So this notion that if you actually believe in socialism, if you don't just believe in whatever it is the bread tube synthetic left believes, that you are therefore not effective, and that only, day-to-day reforms are only won by reformists. That is absolutely ridiculous. Holly Horn is in the chat saying Helen Keller, and that's true. Helen Keller, the activist for the rights of the disabled community, she openly praised the Soviet Union, spoke glowingly of the Soviet Union, called it the red star in the East that's rising. It's just such a critique, and the idea that it is white to believe in communism is it's really racist. I mean, it's racist, right? I mean, it presents the idea that people of color just aren't smart enough to understand ideology. Only white men could understand it. And if you want to be really woke, you need to not be interested in communism, because that's not the truth. If anything, that actually kind of feeds into the Nazi anti-Semitic myth, right? The Nazis always presented the civil rights movement, the fascists and racists always presented the civil rights movement as a Jewish conspiracy, right? The civil rights movement was a bunch of communist Jews, manipulating these naive and inferior black people to carry out their agenda. That's what the Ku Klux Klan cartoons would be like. It was always, these black people couldn't be smart enough to actually become communists, but there's a group of evil Jewish communists like manipulating them behind the scenes, and the evil Jewish communists actually understand it, but the black people are just puppets of this maniacal scheme. That's Nazi propaganda. But that's basically what AOC is repeating here, right? The idea that it's a privileged critique, right? It's not actually people of color who might be upset with Joe Biden's record and Kamala Harris's record. Um, Animal rights. It's not actually people of color. It's a bunch of privileged white people who are ideological, who are manipulating them. They're bad faith actors, manipulating them behind the scenes. This is like the protocols of the elders of Zion, basically. That's what this is, right? It's this idea that me and Jimmy Dore, and we're first of all, we're all supposed to be super rich. So me and Jimmy Dore are actually billionaires, which we ain't. Me and Jimmy Dore and Jason Unruhe, we're all sitting there going, "Oh, we have our maniacal, evil, authoritarian, tanky agenda. How can we manipulate the poor black people to get what we want? We don't care about their rights. Ha 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 ha. We just want to carry out our maniacal, tanky agenda. We're the privileged class essentialists. Ha 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 ha. I know. We'll tell the truth about Kamala Harris's record as a criminal prosecutor. We'll tell the truth about Joe Biden's record. Ah, ha 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 ha. And we'll manipulate those poor, inferior, non-white people into our agenda for carrying out class struggle. Ah, ha 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 ha. We are. This is basically what they're saying. It's really bizarre. Um, um, all right. Connect. This is basically what they're saying. And look, folks, one of the best experiences I ever had was in 2013. I got to attend the World Festival of Youth and Students in Quito, Ecuador. And that was a great, great experience for me, because I left the United States and I went to a gathering of communists from all over the world, and it was a breath of fresh air. Because the communists that I met at the World Festival of Youth and Students, the communists from Venezuela, the communists from Cuba, the communists from Angola, the communists from India, the communists from Vietnam, um, they were a completely different breed than Western communists. I don't agree with some of the end goals of. Okay. Okay. Don't agree with. I mean, they were just a completely different breed of communists than what we have in the United States. They wore suits and ties. They were very, very ideological and smart, and they could talk to you about ideology and communism. They knew Marx and Lenin like the back of their hand. They were very, very smart, but they also were leading millions of people and leading community organizations of millions of people elected to parliaments. They were not armchair revolutionaries. They were not ultra leftists who were cut off and isolated from the people and had a crazy incoherent ideology. They were able to speak about Marxism very clearly, um, and they represented millions of people. And they were amazing, right? The communists around the world, they're healthy. They're healthy communist organizations, right? You go to India, you have healthy communist organizations. You go to Vietnam, you go to China, you go to, Zimbabwe, Angola, South Africa. You have healthy communist organizations, right? Supply and demand. You have healthy communist organizations. People that are that are responsible, clear-headed, ideological people who lead mass organizations that are dedicated to achieving a socialist society or building and constructing socialism in their country. They're not crazy, isolated ultra-leftists, and they're not sellouts. They're actually building, and they actually understand Marxism. They haven't abandoned Marxist principles. They're the real thing. And you don't have that in the United States. In the United States, you have reformist elements that just kind of do what the Democrats are doing and kind of imagine they're still socialists, on the one hand. And then on the other end, you have crazy ultra-left isolated elements, right? Whereas these folks that I met in Ecuador at the World Festival of Youth and Students, again in 2017 in Sochi, Russia at the World Festival of Youth and Students, these were real communists. And they tended to be pro-China. And they tended to be pro-Russia. They tended to be friendly toward the Democratic People's Republic of Korea and Cuba. Not many Trotskyites. Not many ultra-Maoists. These were real communists. And most of them weren't white. Right? Only white people are interested in communism. No, these people were overwhelmingly not white. I met communists from Sri Lanka. I met huge numbers of communists from everywhere, African countries, huge communist parties, Namibia, the Southwest African People's Organization, Angola, the MPLA, wow, so many, Southern Africa, you have millions of people that are in communist parties and understand Marxism. And, they don't say Marxism is for racist white guys. They don't say that. They actually believe in Marxism. They know Marxism very, very well. They know it way better than most American leftists do. And they don't say that it's a privileged critique to actually want a socialist society. They don't say it's class essentialism if you actually talk about Marxism and don't just sit around talking about privilege politics and who's the most oppressed all day long. No, most of the communists in the world are not white. The overwhelming majority of communists in the world are not white. There are 90 million members of the Chinese Communist Party. None of them that I know of are white. The South African Communist Party, huge, right? The Communist Party of Venezuela, the Communist Party of Bolivia. The communist in India, you have Kerala, a whole province controlled by communists. Very few of those communists in Kerala are white. The idea that communism is a white ideology is completely made up. It's completely made up. Communism is very much an ideology of people of color. It may have started out in Europe, but since the end of the Second World War, at least, I would say the majority of communists in the world have not been white. It may have actually been, it may have been even before that. So this idea that communism is a white ideology is ridiculous. And then on top of that, the notion that actually wanting to achieve socialism, actually being critical of social democracy, saying that, hey, AOC should force the vote, the idea that makes you a bad faith actor, that means that you're somehow disruptive. No, I mean, these kind of things have gone on. Making demands is generally how history is made, by placing pressure, by making leaders uncomfortable, by struggling. I mean, my goodness, my goodness. There you go. Many in Africa have been able to develop countries, saying how any African would have been able. Okay, Kwame Ture, interesting. But yeah, I mean, it's shocking to me. And movementism. This really comes out of the 1960s. It's the 1960s. You had the counterculture. The counterculture. The hippies. They like to go to rallies and play drums and get with the movement, man. Tune in, turn on, drop out. And there suddenly became this notion, well, that the average, the majority of people in U.S. society are not capable of being won to our ideas. We're this group, we're this enlightened few, we're this enlightened group of people who really understand how it is, and we're going to do this hippie thing, and we're going to build this isolated group, this group of people isolated from U.S. society, who feel like we're the enlightened few, and it's going to be called the movement, and that's what we're going to do. That's generally how the left operates at this point. That's how the left operates. They're building this thing called the movement, and it's on the fringe of the Democratic Party. The only people that are capable of being recruited are like the most radical elements in the Democratic Party. And look, and it's not just AOC and DSA that operate this way. Look, this is, look, Workers' World, PSL, their whole strategy is they want to be king of the protest cage. They want to be king of the protest cage. Their strategy is whatever the liberals are talking about, Black Lives Matter, Occupy Wall Street, Trayvon Martin, war, not war much these days, but, whatever the liberals are talking about, legalize marijuana, whatever the liberals are talking about, they go get a permit, and they set up a stage with their fancy sound system, and the liberals will come to their rallies. And that means they're the vanguard, because whatever the liberals want to protest around, they come to their rallies. That's their strategy. That is the strategy of the Party of Socialism and Liberation. They're quite good at it. It's the strategy of the Workers' World Party. They're not very good at it. Whatever the liberals are doing, whatever liberals are mad about, racism, sexism, whatever liberals are upset about this week, drive out Donald Trump, impeach Donald Trump, whatever liberals are saying, we get the stage, we get the cage, we get the permit, we get the stage and the cage, and we're in charge because we have the permit, right? The bourgeois state gives us the permit, and we get everyone to carry our signs with the name of our signs on it, and if you want to speak at the rally, you got to go through them because they're the king of the protest cage. They're super important, and that's being the vanguard, right? They are king of the protest cage, and I mean that strategy is not that different than what AOC is saying here, right? And if you disagree with them, and if you say to the people in PSL or Workers' World, hey, shouldn't we be getting to average people with socialism? Shouldn't we be developing literature that would convince average people to become socialists? Shouldn't we, be explaining things like China to people? Shouldn't we be able to have ideological discussions with people? Their response inevitably will be, we actually do something. What does that mean? We actually do something. That's basically, what AOC is saying. It's a privileged critique. Actually being able to answer people's questions, right? Because if you're advocating communism in the United States, people are going to have questions. Rightly so. You're going to say, hey, I heard that China is communist and they killed millions of people and that it's an evil society. You have to have an answer. People are going to say, communism failed everywhere it's ever been tried. You have to have an answer. Right? I mean, people are going to say to you, doesn't communism mean everyone gets paid the same thing no matter how hard they work? You have to have an answer. People are going to say, where has communism ever been? You have to have an answer. These people don't want to have an answer, right? Their response, I mean, they don't have an answer. I mean, they really don't have an answer. Is China socialist or capitalist? Well, they don't have an answer. You talk to the average member of Workers' World or PSL, they don't have an answer. They don't have an answer. And their response, and if you're young and you join their group, and you join their group and you were actually interested in this topic, they're going to be very hostile to you. They're going to say, well, you're not a real organizer, right? Real organizers just, and you listen to you go to their rallies that they have around the liberal issues, and they'll have speakers who get up and say, money for jobs, not war, and Bush is racist, and, and Trump is racist, and everyone, I mean, it's the most watered down stuff. They are hostile to ideology. Trotsky, Stalin dispute. Okay. They are hostile to ideology. And that's basically the same attitude. And generally, what they will do, they will also repeat, I heard over and over again in the Workers' World Party, quote, only white people are interested in communism. It's white and male to be interested in communism. That's not actually true. But what would happen is it would be a person of color who would say it to you. It would not be a white person who would say it. It would be a person of color. And if you so much as responded with, yeah, well, what about like the South African Communist Party? I mean, the majority, if you started to defend yourself, then it would be, wow, are you disagreeing with a person of color about race? And so you weren't allowed to disagree, basically. And it was just, we don't believe in ideology in this group, and that's how it works. And, that's basically what AOC is saying. AOC is saying we actually do something. PSL, Workers' World, are saying we actually do something. The thing is, what they actually do is different, right? DSA registers people to vote for Democrats and campaigns for Democrats. Workers' World, PSL, have liberal rallies around whatever liberals and CNN and Rachel Maddow are having people protest around. It's a division of labor, basically. I mean, one group does the electoral work for the Democrats, the other does the street agitation protesting for the Democrats. But at the end of the day, they're both basically, they're organizing the liberal movement for the Democrats. That's what they're doing, right? And it's very similar to what the labor bureaucracy is doing right now. Is it possible for the United States to join multilateral order and be opposed to the anti-imperialist, and as being proposed by the anti-imperialist bloc? Multilateral. I mean, that's basically what's going on. And the labor bureaucracy does the same thing. It does the exact same thing. Does the exact same thing. The labor bureaucracy does the exact same thing. I mean, I remember in New York City, there was something called the Fight for 15. And it was, it was supposed to be strikes for $15 an hour, right? And they would announce there's going to be a strike for $15 an hour among fast food workers. And I would get there, and I would see a cage and a sound system set up, and I'd see a bunch of labor union workers out in front of a McDonald's. But I was there with the press, and I would go and try to talk to somebody from the McDonald's. The workers at the McDonald's had no idea the strike was happening. The McDonald's was not actually on strike. They would have like 3 fast food workers for me to talk to. I'd interview them. But it was not a strike. It was a rally. And all the Democratic politicians would get up and say, oh, I love this strike, $15. It wasn't a strike. It was theater. It was performance art. They would do this all over the country. They would have, in New York City, there's going to be a one-day strike for a $15 an hour minimum wage. It wasn't a strike. It was a Democratic Party rally. The workers in the place that was supposedly on strike would have no idea the rally was actually happening. There was not one union contract signed at McDonald's or Wendy's or any of these places. There was no, McDonald's or Wendy's shut down worldwide. There was no McDonald's or Wendy's shut down by any of this promoting regime change, right? It was just theater. It was just performance art. And it's, again, not that different than what Workers' World PSL do. Whatever the Democrats are rallying around, they have rallies around it. And, I mean, they weren't having rallies. And it was, they'd have these, they weren't having actual strikes, right? Now, and this happened a lot. We would hear about, again, like the labor unions, they didn't want to risk actually making the effort to organize these places, right? And so they would just, but they have this loyalty to the Democratic Party. A lot of people in the labor unions don't like the fact that, and I think that the election of Donald Trump was largely a lot of the rank and file of the unions, and that tended to be a lot of Trump voters were labor union members who were disgruntled. Because a lot of what the labor bureaucracy does is just give money to Democrats. They just give money to Democrats. And the Democrats will speak at their rallies about how important it is to have the minimum, raise the minimum wage but then at the end of the day, they're not, and the labor movement, they look like they're starting to, they had a big convention in 2014 where they were putting forward a more radical vision. They sounded like, they talk a better game now. They endorsed Bernie Sanders for president rather than just whoever the mainstream Democrat was. And, but at the end of the day, the labor unions have the money. They really have lots of money. And if the labor unions were actually funding real activism and real organizing, right? They could get a lot done. But most of what the labor bureaucracy does is just give money to the Democratic Party and stage rallies for the Democratic Party. They don't really do a lot of organizing. Now, I understand there's that situation at Amazon, and I really hope that out of this, that's probably the biggest struggle we've seen is this Amazon struggle. And the labor bureaucracy, they better put all their energy into it, right? I mean, they need to put all of their energy into unionizing Amazon right now. They need to do it. They need to absolutely do it. I'm not talking to people on the ground. I'd like to interview somebody from that effort. But, is it a real struggle, or is it just like the Fight for 15 in New York City, where I saw the Fight for 15. They weren't really organizing. It wasn't really a strike. It was performance. It was theater. It was elect the Democrats, basically. Amazon is ruthless. And the labor bureaucracy. Look, Barack Obama, I remember this. Barack Obama, when he was running for president, he said, if workers are on strike for the right to unionize, I will walk the picket line with them. Do you remember this? And in 2011, in Wisconsin, they were pushing a right to work, right to work means you don't have the right to have a closed shop contract, right to work law in Wisconsin. And so public sector workers actually started occupying the building and all of that. And Barack Obama wouldn't march with them. Barack Obama said nothing about it. And then the labor bureaucracy, the labor bureaucracy actually shut down that struggle and diverted it into an electoral campaign. All these people were pouring into the streets, were occupying the state capitol in Wisconsin. And the labor bureaucracy, demobilized it. And they demobilized that struggle of occupying the state capitol. And they got everyone to put their energy into an election campaign, which they lost, right? The people were ready to struggle. And, Obama had said he would support them. Look, the Employee Free Choice Act, right, which would grant workers the right to unionize. If 51% of employees at any workplace vote for, to unionize, they would have the right. They would have the right to unionize. But the Democrats, as soon as they won the elections and Obama got in there, and they forgot all about it. And I mean, it's complex. But at the end of the day, unless you have a revolutionary understanding, unless you have Marxism, unless you have an understanding of who the capitalists are and who the workers are, unless you have an understanding that the banks, factories, and industries ought to be organized to serve public good and not profits, unless you have that, you don't really have the ability to fight capitalist power. You don't. You can't. You don't. I mean, that's at the end of the day, as long as you kind of buy into the idea that capitalism can just kind of be reformed, that the problem isn't systemic. As long as you buy into that idea, at the end of the day, you're not really able to confront capitalist power. And there is no contradiction between, between being involved in day-to-day struggles and being involved in class struggle and being a socialist and being a revolutionary. There's no contradiction. There is none, right? In fact, the people that have been so key, look, the unemployment councils organized by the Communist Party, Khrushchev's coup of millennium. All right. Coup not. Look, I really had the honor of knowing some older communists, who had been around in the 1930s. I had the honor. There was an 80-year-old woman who, kind of mentored me. I was able to, every Friday I would get together with her and we would read Marx and Lenin and talk about ideology and communism. And, you know, she was a communist through and through. And, she had ways of explaining Marxism in very clear language. You know, um, if people said the USA is a democracy, she'd say it's not a democracy. I never got to vote for my boss. You know, when people would ask if we should support China, or support Cuba or support other socialist countries, she'd say, well, I might not like the union, that a union. I might not like one union or another, but if they're out on strike, I don't break the picket line. There was an understanding that that one could explain Marxist principles in very basic ways, and an injury to one is an injury to all. Racism hurts all workers, and it's through putting the needs of black people first that we're able to advance the entire class and class struggle. And there was a Marxist understanding, and this movementism, this idea that well, if you actually understand Marxism, you're making a privileged critique. If you don't celebrate Joe Biden, if you actually believe in Marxism and talk about class struggle, that's class essentialism. This is toxic. This is toxic stuff. So there you go. I mean, that's just what we've got to do. Look, what we're doing with the Center for Political Innovation is we're trying to get what's missing, and we're trying to get out of the protest cage and get to the masses. That's what we're trying to do. We've got to get out of the movement and get to the masses. We've got to win people to a socialist understanding. We've got to spread socialist consciousness among the people. Look, people can't fight back if they don't know they can win, right? That's all there is to it. They can't fight back if they don't know they can win. Right? Communism is the understanding that we can win. And thank you, Justin Simons. Thank you. Communism is the understanding that we can win. It is the ideological basis. Angela Davis. Very good. It's the ideological basis for understanding that we can actually win. But yes, it's not simply a matter of having to struggle and starve our whole lives and just see our living standards go down. It's the understanding that we can take control of society. We can control the means of production. We can win. That's really what it is. And without that understanding, you can't really maintain a struggle and a fight back. That's why all the great revolutionaries have been communists and have been revolutionaries. So that was just me kind of giving you an off-the-cuff, not well thought out response to AOC's interview. But yeah, we got a lot of super chats here. So why don't I call you out as I see you? Names and locations. Who's with us tonight? And thank you, everyone, for the super chats. I've been writing them down, and I will answer the questions. Who's with us tonight? Names and locations. Who's here? Names and locations. Cleveland Pirate Alex. Brazil. West Palm Beach. Branson, Missouri. Australia. San Antonio, Texas. Washington, I will win. Montreal, Singapore. Justin Simons, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I really appreciate you, Justin. Great presentation last night. Anthony in Detroit. People should go back and watch the CPI event last night. I plugged it earlier, but check it out. Justin gave a great presentation on NATO and the mythology of the West and anti-communism. Colony of New Zealand, Missouri, Springfield, Missouri, Texas from Michigan, Queens, New York, Tennessee, Heathrow, Kansas City, Missouri, Clydebank, Glasgow, Scotland, Manhattan, Dallas, Texas, Covina, California, Joe Gale, good friend of the program out in Nassau County, Chicago, Illinois, happy birthday, Ron, Flushing, Queens, Oklahoma, Pomona, California, Poland, Marta, Maryland, parasocialite in Maryland. Kinky is with us. Fort Lauderdale, Cincinnati, Ohio, Benton Harbor, Michigan. Um, very good. Pennsylvania, USA. Rachel Brown in New York. Tucker Marks, Springfield. Keep up your good work, Caleb. Love your work in Texas. Thank you. Sacramento, Phoenix, Arizona, Boulder, Colorado, Tampa, Florida, Kansas City, Missouri, Balthazar, Oakland, Sao Paulo, Brazil, Cali, Washington, Seattle, Clinton from the UK, Patrick from Los Angeles, Aloha, Big Island in Hawaii, Hi Herb, Buffalo, New York, Marissa is with us, Philly in San Diego, Knoxville, Tennessee, Grayson, Quebec City, Kieran from San Diego, Madonna from Iran, good friend of the program. Welcome, Madonna. All right, Puerto Rico, Ukrainians greeted German. Oh, come on now, Joseph. That's not actually true. Come on, but I can address that. Come on. All right, Ukrainians in World War II. We'll talk about that, though. Not actually true, but I can understand why you might think that, and we can address that. Los Angeles, Caracas, Venezuela, Mississippi, JT24. What's up? Naples, Florida, Seattle, China. T is in China. Las Vegas, Stanford, North Carolina, Dust James, Alameda, California, formerly Zuccotti Park, very cool. Char Char Darling, good friend of the program, and San Juan from Puerto Rico. It is amazing. Quite an international crowd we have. Lots of people from all over the world, all over the United States. All right. Can labor history draw people to communism? Absolutely. Labor history can draw people to communism. And that's the important thing. Look, the labor movement started out as a communist movement. It started out as people who organized the working class, not just for 2 more cents an hour, not just for a union contract, but so they could control the means of production, right? The labor movement has always been a socialist movement. It's only been in recent years, since the rise of imperialism, that you've gotten a reformist labor movement. I mean, it was, the labor movement, and it's won great victories. And I've got lives on here where I talk about the Flint sit-down strike, where I talk about the unemployment councils of the Communist Party. I talk about the industrial workers of the world. I talk about Joe Hill. Labor's Untold Story is a great, important book. Dust James just mentioned it in the chat. And yes, the labor movement really gives the understanding that we can win, right? And that's kind of what I was saying all along. Can cryptocurrency help fund socialist revolution? Well, I mean, it's money, right? I mean, I don't know very much about cryptocurrency, but I mean, it's money, isn't it? I mean, if it's tradable for non-cryptocurrency, for hard currency, then I don't see why not, right? I mean, just if funding is funding, right? I don't. Now, someone asked about Fanny Wright and the Working Men's Party. Well, I don't know much about Fanny Wright. I think that, but I do know about the Working Men's Party. The Working Men's Party was the first Marxist political party in the United States. It was started during Karl Marx's lifetime. It was part of the First International, and it was mainly located on the East Coast of the United States. I think there was something in New York City called the Communist Club, and it was the Workmen's Party, and they were involved in the railway strike of 1877. There was the railroad strike, the biggest strike in all of U.S. history. Never has there been a bigger strike than the 1877 railroad workers' strike, the Pullman strike. And they led that strike. And Eugene Debs was involved in that strike. And then he went to prison. And it was in prison that Eugene Debs read Karl Marx and became a communist. The Workmen's Party, they were part of the First International. They were, I think before the Civil War, they were set up, if I'm not mistaken, the Workmen's Party. So it doesn't surprise me. Now, this individual, Fanny Wright, was said to be associated with Thomas Paine. Thomas Paine, he was, he's the author of Common Sense, which was this document, this pamphlet promoting the American Revolution and urging the United States to declare independence from Britain, saying it was common sense. And Thomas Paine was very progressive. He called for a guaranteed minimum income. He called for abolishing slavery. He was a religious skeptic, and he argued that the Bible was largely astrological symbolism, which was quite a taboo thing to say back in the 1700s. And Thomas Paine was a very progressive person, and he was a popular pamphleteer. He wrote literature that was distributed to the broad masses of people in the colonies to encourage the American Revolution. And he went to France and supported the French Revolution. And he was actually slated to be executed in the French Revolution, but he was able to, survive, to basically get out of being executed. There was some technicality, but he was almost going to be executed in the French Revolution. Thomas Paine had quite a dynamic life. He was quite a dynamic person. And he was probably among the founders of the United States, along with Alexander Hamilton. He was one of the more progressive ones. And it doesn't surprise me that someone associated with him, Fanny Wright, went on to become a Marxist. Doesn't surprise me. It was kind of shocking to me to see Glenn Beck and the right wing trying to, Glenn Beck actually wrote a book, Common Sense. If he knew anything about what Thomas Paine was about, I mean, guaranteed minimum income, supporting the French Revolution, Thomas Paine, the author of Common Sense, was a progressive. So there you go. Good biography of Mao. Well, there's a two-part, so there's a writer that you should probably know about, Han Soo-yin. Now, Han Soo-yin was an American novelist. She wrote a romance novel called Love is a Many Splendored Thing. And it was a hit romance novel in the early 60s. She was a Chinese American. And she became a communist, and she really liked Mao. And so she went and met Mao and interviewed him and such, and she wrote two biographies of Mao, two-part. The first part is called The Morning Deluge, and that's about Mao in the lead up to becoming, the leader of the revolution. And then the sequel is called Wind in the Tower, and that's about Mao leading China. And that's the two-part biography of Mao, Morning Deluge and Wind in the Tower. That's by Han Soo-yin. That's a very good biography of Mao. Unfortunately, it's a little bit, it was written during the Cultural Revolution, so it's got a little bit of the Cultural Revolution perspective, but it's still worth reading. I read The Morning Deluge. It's a very good book. I learned a lot about Mao and his background, about how Mao was originally an anarchist and a follower of Peter Kropotkin, and he had this group called the New People's Study Society, and then eventually he joined the Communist Party, and you learn about the fights in the Chinese Communist Party and where Mao came from. That's very good. I would recommend that. But there are other books out there. There's actually a book that I found that was published in China. I found it in a bookstore. It's called With Chairman Mao on the Long March. And it's actually like the memoir of one of Mao's personal assistants. And it's quite interesting. It's this guy who was like Mao's personal secretary, personal assistant, and it's about it's actually pretty good. I learned a lot from that. There's a lot of bullshit biographies of Mao. I should just say that. Look, and it infuriates me. Okay, all right, folks. If I were to tell you that the Battle of the Alamo never happened, right? If I were to say, that's one of the most famous battles in American history, in Texas, the Battle of the Alamo. If I were to say that never happened, I would need to offer some proof, wouldn't I? Because that would be pretty big. If I were to say the Battle of Gettysburg never happened, again, you would want me to prove that, wouldn't you? You'd need some pretty solid proof that I would make a claim like that. But there's a book that was a bestseller, and George W. Bush recommended it, and you can still find it at bookstores. It's called Mao, the Unknown Story. And that book is, you should read. All kinds of academics and scholars have said this book is not credible at all. Okay? The book claims, for example, that one of the most famous battles of the Chinese Revolution never happened. That's a huge claim. There's a very famous battle on the Long March where there was a bridge that was stretched off across a river, and the other army burned the actual bridge, so it was just chains. It was just chains, linked chains across there. The actual bridge had been burned. And so the soldiers in the Chinese army started, crossing, hanging by the chains to cross as the enemy was shooting at them. And there's paintings of this. It's one of the most famous incidents in Chinese history. And the author, Zhang, the woman is Zhang, and then it's her husband, John Halliday. Zhang and Halliday claim this battle never happened. It never happened. That's huge. And they don't offer any proof. Their proof is, there's some documents we found, and we interviewed this woman who told us that. It's no, if I were to say the Battle of Gettysburg never happened, I couldn't just say, I found some documents that no one else can see, and I interviewed somebody, so therefore it never happened. You can't do that. The book makes all kinds of very extreme allegations, never bothering, just saying, well, we have some documents no one else can see, and we did some like interviews, and we can't tell them the Chinese government will kill him, so we can't tell you who it's with. And it makes all kinds of very extreme allegations against Mao. There's a book that was published called The Private Life of Chairman Mao. And it's written by a man who claims, it was in the 1980s it was published, and it was by a man who claimed to be Mao's personal doctor. And it says all kinds of really extreme stuff. Mao was a pedophile. Mao never brushed his teeth. Mao, tortured little animals when he was I mean, it's the most over the top stuff. And the thing is, it's all according to one man, Mao's doctor. Well, and he moved to the United States in the 80s, and he wrote this book, this tell-all, that says all these very, very extreme allegations. Hundreds of people in China have signed an affidavit saying that book is full of lies, and this was in the Deng Xiaoping era. This was after China's politics had changed. Hundreds of people who worked with Mao said that book is so full of deception and dishonesty, but I see it routinely quoted as undisputed fact. Right? And again, if I wrote a book saying that Barack Obama was a pedophile, that Barack Obama had no teeth because he didn't brush his teeth and his teeth had all rotted out, that Barack Obama did drugs and shot up morphine all day, and that Barack Obama molested children and tortured animals when he was a child, if I wrote a book saying that, if I were to write a book making that claim, people would want to know how I discovered it. And if my source was just, well, I talked to a guy who was his doctor, it wouldn't be taken seriously. But that's not true if it's Mao. You got one guy, he says he was Mao's doctor. Okay, he was Mao's doctor. And he makes all these very extreme allegations. Hundreds of people in China who worked with Mao have signed and said that this is not true. But then everyone just says, oh, they're just saying that. The Chinese government's making them say it. The evil regime is making them say it. It is so unbelievable. If it's against communism, you can say whatever you want. You can say whatever you want. And it's like every year, the biographies of Mao, the biographies of Stalin, they say such extreme things, and they don't bother to prove it. It's like, well, we found somebody who says it, so therefore it's true. And because we all agree that Mao is a bad guy, Stalin's a bad guy, everyone just repeats these things as fact. It's very disturbing. It's very, very disturbing. But yeah, good biography of Mao, Morning Deluge, Wind in the Tower by Han Suyin. There's a number of good books out there. But yeah, it's really unfortunate. It's really unfortunate. And, if you go back to like the 70s, the 60s and 70s, you'll get Mao biographies, you'll get Stalin biographies that don't talk this way. There used to be, in academia, there used to kind of be an understanding that, well, look, okay, take it this way, right? If I were to write a book about Julius Caesar, right, I could write about bad things that Julius Caesar did, and I could write about, some of his winning attributes, and I could write about Julius Caesar as just a historical figure. Fine, and I could talk about bad things that he did. I could talk about some claims, whether they're true or not. I can write about Julius Caesar in a non-political way. I can just say, you know what, Julius Caesar was a leader of ancient Rome. Rome was a slave society, but Julius Caesar enacted some progressive reforms, and, there's a lot of books about Julius Caesar that are like that. There's a lot of books about Alexander the Great. Again, they say, well, he wasn't very good to the Persians, but slavery, but, at the same time, he built some cities, and, people, you can have a balanced view. But anybody in the 20th century, if you write a book about Mao, and you say anything other in like since the 80s, if you write a book about Mao, if you write a book about Stalin, you write a book about Castro, you write a book about Kim Jong-il, and you say anything other than this man was a monster, it's like that book is like declared to be, apocryphal. It's like declared to be a sin. And it's over the top and ridiculous. I'm sure Mao did many bad things. I think the Cultural Revolution was bad. I mean, I can imagine, I wouldn't want to make the decisions that Mao had to make. I mean, can you imagine some of the decisions that he had to make in terms of military, where you're literally deciding who will live and who will die? And, and when they're trying to build an agricultural system in a country that's underdeveloped, I wouldn't want to be in Mao's shoes making those kind of decisions. But did he make bad decisions? Yes. Are there instances where there were good people who got persecuted? Yes. So I'm not a blind apologist for Mao. I'm not going to say he did everything right. He certainly didn't. And again, I wouldn't want to be in the circumstances he was in. And I certainly don't think the Cultural Revolution was good. But the way it's like the party line in America is, if you write a book about Mao, you must write a book about Satan. And if you write a book about Satan, everything you say is just accepted as fact. If you don't write a book about Satan, it's immediately declared to be apologism. And it's communist propaganda. You can't believe anything of it. It's ridiculous. You know, one of the only exceptions, there is a writer named Simon Sebag Montefiore. Simon Sebag Montefiore, he wrote 2 books about Stalin that are balanced. And I don't know how he got away with it, right? But Simon Sebag Montefiore, I think he's such a conservative. He's very, very right-wing and conservative, so no one would ever think he's a communist. But Simon Sebag Montefiore, he's this wealthy British historian. He's from money. He went to Eton, I believe, this elite private school. And he wrote a book about Stalin. He wrote The Court of the Red Tsar, and he wrote Young Stalin. Both of which, honestly, I mean, they have stuff I disagree with in it. They have stuff, but they're like, he portrays a person. He doesn't portray, it's not, evil monster, it's not a horror story. It's a person, right? And he's done actual research, and he's gone into actual Kremlin archives. And, he argues that he's not a Marxist, he's not a socialist, but he says basically Stalin is going to be remembered as kind of a great leader in history, right? He says that Stalin's kind of like Napoleon, he's kind of like Julius Caesar, he's kind of like Alexander the Great, and he's a great leader of Russia who engaged in a lot of repression, but also defeated the Nazis and also raised a lot of people out of poverty, and was also kind of a brilliant organizer. And, he gives kind of an understanding that, look, Stalin was a leader of a country that was struggling to develop, that was invaded and attacked, and, he struggled to build modern Russia, and he made mistakes, and he did some things that were clearly bad, and some of his policies were problematic, but he was a person. And, Simon Sebag Montefiore, because he's not a communist, because he's a conservative, he can get away with that. But a lot of the stuff that's published, I mean, look, folks, this is classic. So, these people that say communism is pure evil, and they just give you this body count, right? Communism killed a million people, right? They have added the COVID-19 deaths to that death count. Did you know that? Like, the Museum of Communism people have added everyone in the world who died from COVID to their big, huge communism killed number. How does that work? Especially when the communist countries have way lower death tolls and have managed COVID way better than the capitalist countries have. But they have added all the COVID deaths in the world to their communism killed 100 gajillion million number. They've added COVID deaths, even though communist societies handled COVID better. If anything, the COVID numbers in the United States, at least the million people killed in the United States, should be added to capitalism's death toll. But they don't. No, everyone who ever died from COVID has been added to the communism body count now. That shows you how completely dishonest these people are. The fact that they would add COVID death, it's like you can't make this up, right? I mean, there's been other instances. They've caught them, adding Nazis who got killed in World War II to their body count, right? I mean, they've caught some of these people who make this communism body count will add Nazis who got killed by the Soviet Union. They'll put them in the body count, and they'll put Soviet soldiers who died in World War II. So basically, everyone who died in the Soviet Union in World War II gets added to the body count. Why? Well, with the Nazis, they were killed by communists, right? Okay. And the Soviets, well, it was Stalin's mismanagement of the army that caused them to die, right? So it's like, if you're looking at these huge numbers that they give you, it includes people who died from COVID-19 because they think COVID-19 is China's fault somehow because Trump said so, and then they think that all the deaths of World War II are all killed by, I mean, it's starting to get ridiculous, right? And again, if we want to play this game with capitalism, how many famines, how many wars, how many people couldn't get access to health care, how many people were malnourished? I mean, all over the developing world, capitalism keeps countries in a state of malnourishment and chronic poverty. It keeps countries from building infrastructure, the IMF and the World Bank. If you were to add up, if you were to do what they say, Stalin killed blah, 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 or Mao killed blah, blah, blah. If you were to do that with capitalism, if you were to honestly do that and say, okay, the game they play is they say there was political repression in this country, there was a famine in this country, there was a war in this country, therefore communism killed all these people. If you do that with capitalism, the number you would get would be so astronomically high. I mean, we're talking billions, okay? If every person who died as a result of political repression in a capitalist country, a famine or lack of resources in a capitalist country, or wars created by capitalism, if you added that up, the number would be so astronomically high. But they don't do that. Now, and it's like, and then they'll say, it's like, and you talk about, okay, well, what about the transatlantic slave trade? How many million people died? Do you blame that on Thomas Jefferson and all that? Is it capitalism? Oh, it's not real capitalism if it's slavery. Oh, it's not really. Oh, okay. Well, that's funny because it's like, the same founding fathers you guys always quoting owned slaves. Okay. The people were, the slave trade was done to make profits for corporation, right? Profits in command. Seems like capitalism to me. But if you're going to say, the Middle Passage, all the people that died in the Middle Passage, the slave trade, that doesn't count as capitalism. It's not real capitalism. Then why can't I say, I guess the Soviet Union, that wasn't real socialism. Something bad happened. And we can just play this game all day long. It's ridiculous. That communism killed a gajillion million people. Stalin and Mao are mass murder. This is yet American Indian deaths aren't attributed to capitalism. Exactly. They don't, it's an appeal to bias. Right? You only get away with this by appealing to bias. If people didn't already hate communism, you'd never get away with saying this. If people didn't already have a negative image of China in their head, you wouldn't get away with saying this. The way they write about communist countries, the way they write about the history of the 20th century is ridiculous, and there's no neutrality in it. We can talk about, the emperors of ancient Egypt in a neutral way, right? I haven't read it. I haven't read that book. But we cannot talk, I mean, it's deeply frustrating, deeply frustrating. So yeah, there you go. You asked about biographies of Mao and I gave you a long answer. Someone asked about Masonic origins of the U.S. ruling class. Masonic origins of the U.S. ruling class. Well, I don't know if I would put it that way. I mean, a lot of the founders of the United States were Freemasons. What is Freemasonry? Freemasonry is it's a secret society. It's a group of men who are, they take good men and make them better. It started 1600s, 1700s, I believe. There's different wings of it. There's Scottish Masonry, English Masonry, there's French Masonry. It's like an association of men, right? But it's anti-Catholic. It was anti-Catholic, and it was basically a vehicle for the early bourgeoisie to fight against feudalism. They believed in certain principles, and even though officially it was open to people of different faiths, they never allowed Catholics because of the right of confession. Catholics are obligated to tell their confessor any of their sins. So because of that, Catholics are generally not allowed to become Freemasons. Historically, the Masonry, even though they tell you it's not a religious organization, it's just a fraternity, the higher up you get in Masonry, you eventually learn they're kind of Unitarians. They kind of argue there are truths in all faiths. There is one source. You read the Quran. You read the Bible. You read the Quran. You learn about the Knights Templar and how the Catholic Church persecuted the Knights Templar and how that showed the Catholic Church didn't believe in science or something like that. It's an association. It's basically a fraternity. Nowadays, it's not really a big deal. There's clubs that still exist, but it's not a big deal. But before television was invented, these kind of groups were a really big deal. My grandparents used to tell me about this. They used to say, before TV was invented, Caleb, the Tuesday night card game was really, really important. And what club you were in right? And it wasn't just the Masons. There was the Lions Club, there was the Odd Fellows Club, there was the Elks Club. You know, who you played cards with on Tuesday night in a small town, especially, was a really big deal. And these fraternities, you know, were these kind of fraternal associations were a big deal. And they would usually be gendered. There was Masonry was for men, and then they had the Order of the Eastern Star for women. But you know, it was in most of American history, this is a Protestant, and I think now they allow Jews too, but originally it was Protestants only. You know, it was a Protestant, you know, fraternal association. If you go back to the time of the founding of the United States, it was a little bit more than that, though. It was you know, business owners, scholars, scientists who didn't, you know, they didn't want to go along with the Catholic Church. And you have to remember, there wasn't, at the time that feudalism was being overthrown, okay? In feudalism, you don't have freedom of speech. In feudalism, if you get up and say, hey, you know, the Catholic Church is wrong, you get burned at the stake. In feudalism, if you get up and say, hey, this king is not a good king, you get you get beheaded, right? You don't have freedom of speech. In all man-made political systems have flaws, right? All You don't have freedom of speech, you know, in a feudal society. You don't. You don't have freedom of speech in a feudal society. You don't. Okay, you can't say what you want. So as the capitalist class, the merchants and eventually the capitalists were getting together and trying to overthrow feudalism, they couldn't walk around and say, hey, we've got this new system called capitalism and freedom and the rights of man. You couldn't do that, or else you got your head cut off, or else you got burned at the stake. So they formed secret societies. And it wasn't just Freemasonry. In Bavaria, there was the infamous Bavarian Illuminati, right? And Bavaria was a Catholic kingdom, and you know, the people who didn't like Catholicism, the atheists of Bavaria, formed the Bavarian Illuminati, and they got caught and they all got executed. And that's the basis of the Illuminati conspiracy theory. You had alchemy. Alchemy was a big deal, right? You know, people that wanted to study chemistry. There was this whole tradition going back to, like, you know, back to almost ancient times of people, you know, experimenting and trying to turn lead into gold. And again, they had secret signs and handshakes because you couldn't be talking about that kind of thing, right? So yes, these secret societies, you could call them, were very key in overturning capitalism because they, you know, that's how you had to organize in a feudal society. And yes, Benjamin Franklin, George Washington, they were Freemasons because they were capitalists, and they, you know, a lot of times they were religious skeptics. They were followers of John Locke, life, liberty, and property, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, the rights of man. They were for overturning feudalism and establishing, you know, the ideals of the Enlightenment. And so, not surprisingly, they were part of Freemasonry, which was a society, a club, basically, of men who thought that way, that was kind of after, you know, covertly it was, if you got in it and you paid enough money and you'd been in it long enough and you recruited enough people, eventually they told you they were kind of Unitarians, right? They kind of argued that all religions basically teach the same thing. You'd study the Quran, you'd study the Bible, you were very critical of the Catholic Church. But, you know, on the surface, it just looked like a club, right? Only like the trusted members learned that. And my understanding of how Masonry works is you join Masonry. They have strict rules about how you could join. I probably couldn't be a Mason because I'm a communist, right? I think they have a rule, no communist in Masonry. And they don't allow Catholics, and you can't have ever committed a crime, and you know, they're very strict about who can and cannot be a Mason, and you have to have like 2 other members vouch for you or something. It's very exclusive. You join Masonry, and after you've been in for a while, you move up levels, and the way you move up levels is you go to like workshops. They have these like events where they tell stories to you, basically. They tell you stories, and they teach you some of their Masonic wisdom. And after you sit through one of these lectures and you learn some of this Masonic wisdom, you go from one rank to another rank. And there's like, what is it, Master Mason and, Knights Templar, and, you move up ranks, basically. And after a while, when you get high enough, you're in the highest degree or whatever, it's a club, basically. It's kind of like the Boy Scouts. The Boy Scouts is a lot like Masonry, right? My brother was a Boy Scout. It was a club. He joined the Boy Scouts. He would go to a workshop, and then after he went to this workshop, they'd give him a merit badge, and he would move up to a higher rank of the Boy Scouts. And by the time my brother graduated from high school, he became an Eagle Scout, and that was the highest rank of Boy Scout. It's a lot. That's basically Freemasonry, right? That you join the group and you go and you sit through a bunch of lectures and you learn some of their knowledge and teachings, and then you move up a rank, and then and you pay some money. And yeah, kind of like Scientology, actually. Kinky is saying it's a lot like Scientology. Yeah, it's a lot like Scientology. I guess Scientology is different because in Scientology there's this like one-on-one, they call it auditing. It's kind of like therapy but it's the same kind of thing. You're in it long enough, you pay more money, they teach you a little bit more, and you move up. And actually, people talk about how in early Christianity there was a divide. The early Christian church had two wings, and one of the wings was called the Gnostic Christians. And the Gnostic Christians, it was a similar practice. They didn't have a Bible that everyone could read. They had some knowledge that you had to get trusted and learn a little bit more, and learn a little bit more, and learn a little bit more, right? And eventually, the Roman Church burned the Gnostics at the stake. And Gnosticism, the Gnostic tradition of Christianity, was declared to be a heresy. So that's a way of running a religion, basically, right? Some religions, it's all on the table, it's right up front. Some religions, it ain't all on the table. You have to learn it over time, and that's again, Scientology, Mormonism can be like that. A lot of the beliefs of the Mormons they don't tell you until you've been in for a while. Um, there you go. And actually, Gnosticism, the Gnostic tradition in Christianity, was probably a lot like Kabbalah, right? Which is Jewish mysticism, right? The Jewish mystical tradition is kind of like this, right? The actual Jewish religion, you have the Talmud, you have the Torah, it's all up there. But Kabbalah is a little bit of a different tradition where there is certain, you learn over the course of time, you learn certain things and you learn certain things. Yeah, okay. Well, that's a long answer, but yeah. There you go. Yeah, masonry. There you go. All right. Animal rights. Well, look, I think cruelty to animals is deeply unhealthy, right? If you look throughout history, serial killers, mass shooters, people like that tend to torture animals when they're children. Indifference, when people, look, what kind of person could see a cute, adorable puppy being tortured to death and be okay with that? I mean, if somebody is able to see a cute, adorable little puppy being tortured to death and go, that's fine with me, they're not well. And we know that, right? That humans have empathy for humans, but they also tend to have empathy for animals. So, if somebody, if there's a child who's torturing animals, that child is deeply unhealthy. And we know that. So cruelty to animals, bad, right? That tends to be bad. Not tends to be, we all know kind of the cruelty to animals. It's feeding into that sadistic instinct. It's when a person doesn't have remorse, doesn't have empathy. They talk about with kids too. Like little kids don't seem to understand. A lot of times kids, like when they're really little, they're not being sadistic in torturing the animal. They just don't understand, right? Like I've seen that with little kids. Like, little kids will see the dog and they'll like pull on the dog's tail really hard. And they don't know that like that dog feels pain. You know what I mean? And so it's like, with little kids, but they'll learn it really quick when that dog like barks at them and like, and like almost bites them. They kind of get it, right? They're like, oh, wow, I just pulled on that. But it's like kids kind of have to learn that, right? Empathy is not, you have to learn it to some degree. Some of it's probably natural, but on some degree or other, you have to kind of learn empathy, right? So cruelty to animals, if someone never learns that, if someone never gets that, right? If they never get that, you hear stories about a little kid who like rips up baby bunnies or, like some teenager who like enjoys, putting animals in ovens or something. They're not well. We look at that and we say, that's a dangerous person. And that person will probably harm humans, right? So cruelty to animals is bad. Same time though, and I hate to say this, and I know I sound like a jerk when I say this, and I'm being a stickler here, and I know there's probably people who are going to hear this and go, God damn it, Caleb. They're going to get really angry when I say this. I'm deeply sorry. And if you disagree with me on this, I love you. I still love you. You're still my comrade. You're still my friend. But you asked me my opinion. I'm giving you my Caleb Maupin personal opinion. The term animal rights is an oxymoron. Rights are by definition human. Okay? I'm sorry. Okay? And I know there's people who hear that and get angry, but I'm being a little bit semantical here, but rights belong to people. Okay? Other things, non-people don't have rights. Okay? That's just how it works. Animals, you have the right to vote. You don't have the right, animals can't vote. Animals can't run for office. Uh, you know, I mean, you know, you know, Non-humans by definition don't have rights. Okay, so cruelty to animals, I'm opposed to it, right? And I've seen. Look, I'm not a vegan. I do eat meat, but I know a lot of people who are vegans. They look very healthy to me. They look far healthier, so it's probably a very healthy diet, and I understand why cruelty to animals bothers people and all of that. But at the same time, you know, I don't think that animal rights as a concept is, I don't think it's the correct term. So forgive me if I'm stepping on your toes, but I've always understood the definition of rights to be rights are by definition human. Okay? I mean, that's just been my understanding of it. I will add that I was never a vegan, but I was a vegetarian when I was in college for like 2 years. I was a vegetarian, and it did not go well. It didn't go well at all. I would wake up in the middle of the night dreaming about meat. It was weird. So there you go. And I was very afraid after my 2 years of vegetarianism. When I finally started eating meat, I was convinced that I would become very sick, right? Because that's what people always say, is that you lose the enzyme in your body to eat meat or whatever. And I went and I ate meat again, and I did not get sick. So I was like, oh, wow, okay. I thought I was going to get sick again. Sick when I ate meat, but nope, didn't. I didn't get sick. So I never lost the enzyme. I had a college professor who was a very odd man. And he was a vegetarian, but he said that because he did not want to lose the enzyme that digests meat, he would eat a cheeseburger every Friday. That's what he told us. He said he ate one cheeseburger every Friday. And he said, and he told us this on the first day of class. He said, I am a vegetarian, but because I fear that there could be a war or there could be a situation where meat is the only option, he said, I never eat meat except one Friday. I go to McDonald's, I order a cheeseburger, and I eat it as fast as I can so that I never lose the enzyme to eat meat. That was the college professor I had. Won't say his name. One of the strangest things I've ever heard. So are there other people that do that? Are there other people that are like vegans, except one day a week they eat one cheeseburger as fast as they can to make sure they don't lose the enzyme to swallow it? Is that a thing? Do people do that? Is this college professor I had the only person who did that? Is that a common thing? Are there people in the chat, who know about this? Have you ever met anyone who does that, who eats one cheeseburger a week to make sure they don't lose the ability to eat meat? I've never heard of this. It's a pretty silly thing, but there you go. All right. All righty. Connect with Marxist countries. Yeah, absolutely. Go to Venezuela. I would love to take a delegation to Venezuela. I would love to visit China, red comrades in China. I would love to arrange trips to China, Cuba. Yes, I would love for young people to visit socialist countries and learn from what actual socialism is like. There's actually a very good article you can read. It's called How to Visit a Socialist Country, published by Monthly Review magazine. All right, we'll talk about anarchists in Spain. Monthly Review magazine. It's called How to Visit a Socialist Country. And if you read it, it's actually like an insight into the synthetic left versus the what do you call it? Versus, the Western left. Because, how to visit a socialist country. It's like in socialist countries, you're going to see a lot of military stuff. Socialist countries, you're going to see a lot of pride in their country, God forbid. In socialist countries, you're going to see, socialist countries are not, they're not what bread tubers like. Bread tubers, socialist countries are not like that. Go read, before you visit a socialist country, go read the Monthly Review article, How to Visit a Socialist Country, because it points to the very essence of what I'm always hammering home on here about what leftism actually means. So, alrighty. This person says, what if I don't agree with all the goals of Marxism, but they want a stateless world and they don't like hierarchies? Well, I mean, I don't know exactly. I mean, you can believe what you want to believe, good sir. I'm not expecting you to agree with me on everything. I'm on here. I have good friends. There are people in the chat that I love deeply who are vegans and are probably horrified by what I said earlier about animal rights. There are people in the chat who are Trotskyites and are probably horrified by my position on Trotskyism. There are people in the chat right now who are anarchists. There are people in the chat right now of many different perspectives. You don't have to agree with me on everything, good sir. I'd be curious as to what you don't agree with about Marxism. But, we can talk about that. But what if you don't agree? You said you do want a stateless world and you do want to get rid of hierarchies. The only way to do that is to have the banks, factories, and industries organized to serve public good and not profits, to raise living standards and increase the wealth in society so that we can lay the basis for getting rid of hierarchies and abolishing the state. Only with socialism are you able to do that. So I think no matter what you think these other goals are, if you actually want a stateless world without hierarchy, you should want socialism, because only with a planned economy and central planning to create that level of growth can you ever get that, right? The basis of an egalitarian society is prosperity. You cannot build an egalitarian society on the basis of poverty. You can't. Right? And that's what the 20th century has been a big slap in the face and a reminder of that. In China, during the Cultural Revolution, the Gang of Four argued that China could get all the way to communism in poverty, and it was a disaster. Che Guevara, great, brave anti-imperialist fighter, but he tried to build socialism in Cuba without material incentives. Didn't work, right? That you need material incentives. You need, to some extent, you might need a market sector, right? That the basis of eradicating inequality is abundance, right? That the state, class society, all of these things are rooted in scarcity. Scarcity is what creates an inequality. If there's enough for everybody, nobody hoards. So you're okay with state society and hierarchies. Okay, I don't know why, but if that's what you want, there you go. But like someone used the example of understanding communism, of like a working class family versus an ultra rich family, and the refrigerator. Right? In a working class family, right, the parent has to regulate the refrigerator. Right? If they have a house full of kids, right, they got 2 or 3 kids. They've got a refrigerator, and they're a low-income family. They have to regulate who takes things out of that refrigerator, and the parent has to be in charge, and they have to say no, but in a wealthy family, an ultra-rich family, any kid can walk over to that refrigerator at any time and take what they want, and no one cares. That's the difference, right? That regulation, authority, rationing is based on scarcity. Abundance leads to the lifting of restrictions and the lifting of hierarchy, right? That a wealthy family, they don't care what anyone takes out of the refrigerator. Low-income family, low-income parents have to carefully regulate that refrigerator, right? That's the difference. Why did Che Guevara not build socialism in Argentina? Well, that's an interesting question. Che build Argentina. Alrighty. Okay. Alrighty. All right. Next question. Supply and demand in socialism. Well, there's going to be some element of that, but ultimately you have the state stepping in to control it, right? And look, supply and demand, even in capitalist societies, there's often an attempt to regulate it, right? The government will set prices and things like that. There will be attempts to control it. But in a socialist society, in the market sector, you'll probably have some supply and demand, but supply and demand won't be in control. The state will have the ability to nix it at any point. The state will have the ability to dictate production in major industries, things like that. All right. The Trotsky-Stalin dispute. Someone said, was it not about politics? It was about personalities. Well, no, it was about politics. Trotsky represented the revolutionary intelligentsia, and he advocated, turning the Soviet Union into a base area to spread communism all over the world. Stalin said, on the other hand, that wasn't what was needed. What was needed was they needed to sign some treaties with Western countries and start focusing on industrializing the USSR and building socialism in one country. Trotsky represented the bloodlust of the revolutionary intelligentsia. Stalin represented the desire of the broad masses of Russian people to build a better society and to build, to use socialism to build a more peaceful, progressive society. And that was the contradiction. The two were at odds with each other. Stalin was not Russian. He was Georgian. He was from an ethnic minority, a country that was colonized at the time of the revolution. He had studied to become a priest, and his background was in religion and theology. And if you read about Stalin, he was an organizer. There's a story of Stalin that when Stalin was a revolutionary organizer, all the Bolshevik leaders got deported to Siberia, and so they're all deported to Siberia, in the middle of this desolate place where there's it's rural. There's barely anybody. And they're all the Bolshevik leaders are just, oh no, what are we going to do? We're in the middle of nowhere. We've been deported to Siberia. Meanwhile, Stalin goes to the local village and he makes friends with everybody and becomes very popular. And eventually, Stalin is elected president of the local hunting club. Right? Stalin knew how to talk to people. There's something, it's funny. If you look at Stalin, you look at Mao, you look at Fidel Castro, there's this kind of persona that you could get. They were like man's man, kind of. That's what people wanted in the 20th century. Now, we're in a different time now, but in the 20th century, people kind of wanted, listen to Fidel Castro's speeches, right? He's on the internet. You can watch hours and hours of Fidel talking. How should the U.S. react to socialist revolution in Mexico? I mean, there's a certain personality, right? And, people talk about the Freudian desire for a father, right? That's like a big thing in politics, right? That part of the reason women have had difficulty in politics, there's been a shortage of women elected, is that people kind of want, they want politicians to be their father, right? They want politicians to be their dad. Right? If you look at successful politicians in the world, they give off this fatherly persona. And that's actually very true. If you look at, think about Bill Clinton, Barack Obama, George W. Bush, Trump, people talk about Trump was the mean daddy. Um, um, all right. Why? All right. It's like Trump was the mean daddy, they talk about that, right? That they give off kind of a fatherly persona, right? That people elect somebody to be their leader who kind of fulfills kind of a fatherly role in their mind. And if you look at Stalin, you look at Mao, you look at Fidel Castro, they kind of gave people that vibe. They were this kind of man's man who could laugh with everybody, who was I mean, it's, Stalin was elected head of the hunting club. And, I mean, it's like they had this, Mao had been a principal of an elementary school. Mao had been a librarian, a university librarian, and then he became the principal of an elementary school. The first article that Mao ever published was about why physical education was important. In China, they have this tradition. Most schools in China have this tradition of exercising in front of the school in the morning, right? And it's in Asian countries they do it, and in socialist countries they do it. Not and they did this in Ecuador when I was in Ecuador. It was really neat. In the morning, we'd see all the Ecuadorian kids out there doing like karate moves that they'd been taught by President Correa. That was really neat, and in Cuba they do this too, and in socialist societies, right? Often the day at school begins with all the kids will be out there and they all do exercises together. Well, the first essay that Mao ever wrote was about that. And it was about how important that is, how it's like it builds unity. You're learning to care for your body. It's a very good ritual that they do. I don't know why we don't do that in U.S. schools. I think that'd be a great way to start the school day. If all the kids got out there and, you have to have gym class anyway. So why not, instead of having separate gym class, have at the beginning of school, all the kids get out there and the whole school do exercises together in the morning. I think that's great. And they do that. They've been doing that in China for thousands of years. And Mao's first essay is about why that's important. And it's like there's a certain personality, right? Stalin, Mao, Fidel Castro, they gave off this kind of like man's man, community organizer vibe, right? The fatherly persona, the I'm a well-liked community man, that's the kind of vibe they gave off. We're in a different time. That's not what people are looking for now. People are not looking for that now. They're looking for something different. One thing that people have noticed is that Remember when Hillary Clinton had that video that went viral? And it was like, Hillary Clinton is your abuela, like your Hillary Clinton's your Latina grandmother. You remember that? It went viral, and people thought it was just cringe. People were thought this is like, they called it quote unquote hispandering. But what that was probably based on is the fact that if you look at successful female politicians in recent years, for example, in Germany, Angela Merkel, her persona is grandma, right? If you look at Michelle Bachelet in Chile, again, her persona, grandma. You look at, the president of Brazil. What was her name? The socialist from the Workers' Party before she got impeached. What was her name? I cannot remember her name for the life of me. I was in Brazil when she was president. I actually went there and gave a talk during the impeachment. What was her name? I cannot remember her name. Dilma Rousseff. Again, same kind of personality. And that if you want to be a female politician in our time, that I'm your grandma is kind of the winning persona. That's what people will vote for in terms of personalities. People like Angela Merkel because they feel like she's their grandma, right? It's a similar thing to in the 20th century. People wanted politicians to be their dads. And so it didn't work for Hillary Clinton because Hillary Clinton, I mean, she doesn't seem like your grandma. She seems terrifying. She seems like a terrifying, scary person. She doesn't remind me. You see Hillary Clinton, you don't think your grandma. When you see Hillary Clinton, you think like I don't know, like I don't even know what you think. Mean teacher. That's what I think when I see Hillary Clinton. I think like mean, unpleasant female teacher. That's what she reminds me of. Afraid Hillary Clinton's gonna, give me detention after school or something. I mean, that's the vibe she's always given me. But there you go, and it didn't work. But they were trying to sell her that way because that works. I don't know how did we get on that from the Stalin-Trotsky dispute. We're going all over the place tonight, folks. But that's okay, you guys. That's what you like, right? I get on here and ramble about shit, and you like it. So hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. We're having a great time. All right, USA join the multilateral order. Absolutely. When the working people of the United States wake up and arise, I would love to see the United States break out of the global capitalist imperialist system, establish friendly relations with Iran and Russia and China and Venezuela, start building infrastructure all over the world, be part of a new global effort around fusion energy. Have joint space missions with Russia and China. Yes, the USA could become part of the new multilateral order. Yes, but only if the working class rises up, right? It wouldn't be possible under this system. You would have to push back the power of the bosses and the bankers. Yes, the United States could join the emerging multilateral order, but only if we have a government of action that will fight for working families. Only a government of action that will fight for working families will break the United States out of the emerging multilateral order. All right. Why were the Bolsheviks so cruel to the Romanovs? Well, if I'm not mistaken, I believe some of the Bolshevik leaders that were involved in the killing of the Romanovs did get punished. That was, but at the same time, I mean, okay, the time the Romanovs were executed, the Russian Civil War was going on. The country was blockaded. Food and medicine could not get into the country. The White Army and the Red Army were killing each other. There was a ugly civil war going on in which literally millions of people died. 15 countries invaded the Soviet Union. Russians were killing other Russians. There were ethnic pogroms, right? The White Army would just go to Jewish villages and kill all the Jews. The British sent their military to Azerbaijan and seized the oil fields, and there were, Christians mobilized to kill Muslims, and it was the Russian Civil War, the immediate aftermath of the Russian Revolution, was an absolute nightmare. Russia was attacked and suffering, and the fact that the Bolsheviks were able to get out of that nightmare and then eventually get to, outer space and industrializing and raising people out of poverty is nothing short of a miracle. Right? It shows that socialism is a very successful system. The fact that they got from the nightmare of the Russian Civil War to outer space, to, defeating the Nazis, to, building the world's biggest power plants. I mean, the Soviet Union got out of a really, really bad situation and got to become a fully industrialized country and a superpower. So that shows that socialism does work and it's successful. Amid the nightmare of the Russian Civil War, somebody made a decision to execute the the royal family. And I don't know what I would have done if I was in that situation, but I understand the reason that they gave for doing it was that they felt that by wiping out the royal family, this would basically prevent monarchists from having someone to put back on the throne. The idea was that there was a big, the White Army, the anti-Bolshevik army. It included social democrats, the Mensheviks. It included the constitutional democrats that were anti-czarist, but it also included a lot of Russian monarchists. And I guess the feeling was that if they, exterminated the royal family, then the monarchists wouldn't have anything to fight for because the royal family would be dead. Well, we can look back on that now and say, well, that's a pretty ugly thing to do. But, again, you know, obviously the White Army going into whole Jewish villages and killing all the Jews, that was pretty awful. And, not allowing food and medicine to get in, so millions of people couldn't get access to food and medicine and died. That was pretty awful. The British invading Azerbaijan and slaughtering whole villages of people in Azerbaijan because they wanted to take back the Rothschilds' oil fields. That was pretty ugly. It was a pretty ugly situation, right? The Russian Civil War was a pretty awful situation. The context was pretty awful, and that's when the Bolsheviks made that decision. One thing I think is fascinating is contrast, the Bolsheviks executing the Tsarist royal family to what China did to the emperor. This story, this is fascinating. Have you heard about this? What China did to the emperor. So you have to remember, so up until 1911, China had an emperor. And then you had Dr. Sun Yat-sen overthrew the emperor, established the Chinese Republic. And then, the Chinese Republic was led first by Sun Yat-sen and then by Chiang Kai-shek. Then you had the Civil War, so Mao was fighting Chiang Kai-shek. But then Japan invaded. So when Japan invaded China, they seized Manchuria, they grabbed the emperor. And they said, we're not invading China, we're just restoring the emperor. And the emperor was like the puppet ruler of China for Japan, right? That's what it was, right? Japan said they were supporting the emperor. So you had this guy who claimed to be the emperor, and he was a puppet of the Japanese imperialists. So after the Second World War, and after the Chinese Revolution of 1949, he was arrested, and he was in prison for collaborating with the Japanese. And the Japanese killed millions of Chinese people. Read about the rape of Nanking, horrendous massacres. And he collaborated with the slaughter of his own people, the occupation of Japan. So he was in prison. But in prison, they converted him to communism. They converted the emperor to communism. And when he got out of prison, he was a gardener. He was a gardener, and he was the emperor, went to prison, did his time for having collaborated. In prison, they convinced him that it was wrong to collaborate with the Japanese. They struggled with him. There's a story about him peeing, which is fascinating, right? It's kind of gross, but, in the prisons in China in the 1950s, they didn't have toilets in the cells. They had buckets, right? And the emperor, he'd always had people waiting on him. He'd always had servants and such. So when he peed in the middle of the night, he would wake everybody up because he didn't know that you have to pee, well, never mind. I think you know what I mean. But he would pee in a way that was very loud and would wake up everybody in the cell. And so they had to struggle with the emperor to pee in a way, if he was peeing in the middle of the night, not to pee in a way that woke up the whole cell. Right? He was in this prison cell, and in the prison cell, he took classes on communism, and he wrote a confession, and he confessed to his crimes against the Chinese people, and they actually converted him to communism. And after he got out of prison, he was a gardener, and he ran a garden, and he was just a gardener, and then he died. That's kind of beautiful in a way. It's kind of beautiful, I think. That seemed to be a big aspect of Mao's view of communism, was the idea that people could be reformed, right? And that, and that's interesting because, in the so this is very famous, right? During the Korean War, there were thousands of American soldiers who got taken prisoner, in the prisoner of war camps, they were Korea. In Korea, they were taken prisoner during the Korean War. They were taken to prisoner of war camps in China and became communists. And that scared the crap out of American media. And there was this whole thing about brainwashing. Brainwashing, right? That's the term, brainwashing. That's what it was. The term was actually, it's better translated as thought reform. But what the communists would do in prison, if you were an anti-communist, you'd been trying to overthrow the Chinese government or whatever, you would go to prison and they would engage in, thought reform, basically. And American media was so freaked out because it was all these wholesome, all-American boys from Kansas and Idaho who never believed never believed America could do anything wrong. And they went and fought in Korea to fight the commies, and they got captured, and all of a sudden, they would be hearing them on the radio. There'd be radio broadcasts, and they'd be on the radio saying, American imperialism is evil, capitalism is an evil system, we have no place on the Korean Peninsula. That scared the crap out of Americans, because they're like, how could this possibly happen? Right? How could this possibly happen? And like there's the movie The Manchurian Candidate that was made. It was all about brainwashing and communist mind control. And, it's fascinating. You read some of the stuff about this. Robert J. Lifton was an American psychologist who spent years studying all of this. And it's very fascinating that that apparently, they discovered that the GIs who got converted were the ones who had been like the most blind true believers in American capitalism, right? And generally, all they had to do, with these guys that had this kind of black and white thinking, right? That America can never do anything wrong and communism is just pure evil, right? They would just get them and, they would show them that picture of Emmett Till, Emmett Till being tortured to death, or they'd show them about lynchings and how awful lynchings were. And these guys would sit there, that's not true, that's communist propaganda, America doesn't do racist stuff, black people are lucky to live in America, don't show me your communist lie. And they would just work on them and say, no, this is real. And they would just show them what America does to black people. And then finally these guys would crack. And they'd just crack. And they'd break down and start crying and say, oh, wow, America really is evil. And it was like a light switch, right? They had been blind believers in America, right? So they got them in a situation where they couldn't just look the other way, and they convinced them that America actually did bad things. And so then it was like, click, they became communists. And that's black and white thinking kind of works that way. And that's why the CIA, and this is what led to the Congress for Cultural Freedom, and this is what led to the synthetic left, is because the CIA realized that that's the danger, right? That if America goes McCarthyist, right? If there's no room for ambiguity, when people in the 1950s during McCarthyism, most people believed in McCarthyism. Communists are pure evil and all that. But there were people who had questions. So what did those people do? Click, became communists, right? And they realized that that was the danger. That if you set up a dualistic thinking where there's America is all good and the communists are all bad, that can easily be flipped. And that a lot of the Congress for Cultural Freedom program, where the CIA was giving money to Trotskyites and setting up Trotskyite magazines, the MK Ultra drug program, a lot of what that was about was the CIA trying to basically get rid of that light switch effect and trying to get a situation where, okay, you can be against racism, you can think America's bad, but you can also think, they didn't want that light switch effect, because at the end of the day, that light switch effect would ultimately serve communism. And it's kind of fascinating. Robert J. Lifton writes about this. Edgar Sheen writes about this. And there's a lot that's been published about MK Ultra and CIA brainwashing and all of this. And that they realized during the Korean War that they had a bit of a problem. That all these American GIs became communists in the pre-OW camps, in the prisoner of war camps. They all became communists. And so the CIA was trying to figure out what was going on there. And they did all kinds of research to discover that, and that's what really kind of broke McCarthyism, right? McCarthyism got to the point that it ultimately, it was hurting American imperialism, that a lot of black people who were very angry at the American government were becoming communists, right? Nathan Rich is saying, for more about MK Ultra, search up the name Unabomber. Yeah, he's a result of MK Ultra. Read about what they did to the Unabomber. That's a horrendous story. Anyway, we All right. Giving you long answers tonight, but that's okay. You guys like long answers, so there you go. Am I for a worldwide revolution? Yes and no. I mean, basically, no. I am for people around the world exercising their self determination and coming to the conclusion that socialism is best and adopting socialism on their own. I am against exporting revolution, right? No socialist country, China, Russia, Vietnam, Cuba, no socialist country should be spreading communism all over the world. That's a mistake, right? Every country has their right to choose their own path. And, obviously, sometimes there are acts of solidarity, I mean, for example, China supported Robert F. Williams, the Soviet Union, supported the labor movement in the United States. But at the end of the day, every country has their own self-determination, and again, communism will never come to the United States as the result of a foreign invasion. It will never come to the United States as a result of, a foreign conspiracy. We're never going to become Maoists in the United States. We're never going to become Trotskyists in the United States. We're never going to become Stalinists or Enver Hoxhists or Ho Chi Minhists in the United States. Socialism in the United States will be about addressing the contradictions of U.S. society. It will be a uniquely U.S. form of socialism designed to address the problems here in this country. It'll be the American people rising up to dismantle imperialism and dismantle capitalism and set up an economy that is rationally organized to serve public good and not profits. It'll be a government of action that fights for working families, and it will be a reflection of what the American people want. It will not be the result of a foreign conspiracy. And I have been repeatedly urging people to stop LARPing. Look, only we can create socialism in the United States. That's it, right? And that socialism will always be domestic, right? And that spreading, the idea of spreading a communist global revolution, this is not good, right? It's not good, right? People don't want to have their country influenced by another country that way, right? And look, I mean, look, if and I say this with all due respect to my Vietnamese, Cuban, Chinese friends, but look, if Cuba was invading the United States with the intention of forcing the Cuban system on us, I would oppose that because that wouldn't be right. Right? Just like I would oppose the United States, invading Cuba and forcing our system on that. Every country has their right to self-determination, right? If the Chinese were invading the United States and trying to force us to adopt the Chinese system, I would be against that, right? Because every country has the right to choose their own path. And that, I mean, it's one thing, to make statements of solidarity and such, but no, I mean, every country has the right to choose their own path. So I'm not for worldwide revolution in the sense of communist countries should be spreading communism all over the world. I would say that eventually, I think we will adopt a global planned economy. I think eventually socialism, as socialist economics becomes dominant in the world, more and more countries will adopt socialism. And eventually there will be socialist planning and coordination on a global scale. I do think we will eventually have worldwide socialism. I think it'll happen, but it'll happen because people choose it voluntarily. So, on the one hand, I think we will eventually move that way, and I'm for people eventually choosing that, but I'm not for anyone trying to force it on anyone. All right. Western Marxists promoting regime change. Look, it's deeply disturbing, but it's not new. This is the result of years of manipulation of leftist politics by American intelligence, the Congress for Cultural Freedom. All right, the CIA has been funding Trotskyites for decades. For decades, they've been funding Trotskyites and anarchists and synthetic left. Read Zbigniew Brzezinski. Zbigniew Brzezinski was the main strategist of U.S. foreign policy in the 70s and 80s. And he was all about manipulating communists against each other. He's got a whole book about the technotronic age, about manipulating the new left and the campus left and the hippies against the socialist countries. So it's deeply disturbing. And that there is a gap, right? And I talk about, in my book, City Builders and Vandals, I talk about, the two mindsets of people who believe in communism and, the revolutionary intelligentsia versus the broad masses of people, how they have different desires. And and that the intelligence apparatus of the United States figured out how to kind of manipulate that, right? And that the desire of Western middle class intellectuals for anarchy and freedom, and the desire of people in the developing world to raise their people out of poverty and march toward building a rational socialist society, don't always line up. Really existing socialism often champions itself in a conservative way. It offers stability. It offers societal peace. It props up the traditional family. Whereas Western intellectuals tend to want chaos. They're angry at the world being unjust. They want to tear things down, right? And these divisions have existed in the socialist movement for a long time. But the CIA started figuring out how to manipulate the revolutionary intelligentsia against the socialist countries. And the socialist countries, as they're trying to defend themselves against the West, especially after the fall of the Soviet Union, the socialist countries have gotten more conservative. They very much are reinforcing in their population, we defend stability, we defend social peace. So socialist countries are selling themselves to their populations in a more conservative way. Revolutionary intellectuals in the West are becoming manipulated by imperialism and such, and so you get this divide. The color revolution model. The color revolution is basically Western media and Western NGOs and seizing what used to be the socialist aesthetics. Look, when Brzezinski pushed, gave an interview. He talks about the Afghan trap, and the understanding was that, the USA lost in Vietnam because world public opinion was against the United States. People thought of the Vietnamese people as heroic peasants fighting a foreign army. And they thought of the American imperialists as foreign fascist occupiers. So Brzezinski said, let's set up the Afghan trap, and we'll have the Soviet Union look like the foreign fascist occupiers, and we'll have a whole slick public relations media campaign so that people think Osama bin Laden, and al-Zarqawi and all these Islamic terrorists that they're the Viet Cong, that they're the Vietnamese people, they're these peasants fighting the foreign invaders. Well, it worked, right? And that hijacking leftist aesthetics to serve imperialism, that was the main way the USA won the Cold War. So they've been doing this for a long time. And what frustrates me is I'm the only left voice that talks about this with any depth, right? My book, City Builders and Vandals, the reason it sold so many copies, I'm blown away. I get on there and I'm the only person who talks about this. I gave a lecture on this at the Center for Marxist Education near Harvard University a couple years back. The video was like an internet sensation. So many people have emailed me and said, this changed my life. I'm the only person who talks about this. The Cold War has been over for how many years? But in global communism, we don't seem to be having this conversation about how our movement was manipulated to serve imperialism. And, look, if you, in the West, right, Trotskyites, Maoists, anarchists, any pro-imperialist demonstration, any regime change demonstration, trying to overthrow Venezuela, supporting the Hong Kong, terrorist groups in Hong Kong that are burning people and blowing up any demonstration, you're going to see the Guy Fawkes mask from Occupy Wall Street. There has been a co-optation of leftist aesthetics. Meanwhile, socialism sells itself in a kind of conservative way. This is important to understand. Okay, super chat. Would socialist country want to increase birth rates? All right. Increase birth rates. Wrote it down. Very good question. All right. Okay. All right. The Khrushchev coup is not taught in schools in the United States. Well, yeah, that's true, right? In U.S. schools, you're lucky if you hear the name Khrushchev. I got an American education. I went to an American university. I took the modern history of Europe at the history department. I don't think they even heard the name Khrushchev. If they say Khrushchev, that's good. But yeah, American schools don't teach you jack shit about communism. I'm sorry. In American schools, I learned about communism? When we learned about communism in American schools, we didn't read actual history of China or the Soviet Union. We read this book about barnyard animals called Animal Farm. Okay, that's what our education about communism was, and we didn't hear the name Khrushchev or anything. We just learned that, oh look, these barnyard animals seized control of the farm, but then the pigs started walking. It's all a big. I mean, look, I mean, American schools don't teach you anything about anything. I mean, American education is an embarrassment. We have the worst schools in the Western world. So you're complaining that they didn't teach about Khrushchev's coup or whatever. They don't teach you anything about this. I mean, look, Animal Farm is what most American school kids learn about communism. This book about barnyard animals. That's where they learn about communism. And that book is infuriating because one of the most disgusting things in that book is, it's an allegory for Soviet history, but it's about barnyard animals. One of the most disgusting things in that book is that there is a character in the book called Boxer the Horse. And Boxer the Horse, he's a horse, and he's supposed to represent the Russian working class. And Boxer the Horse gets too old to work, so the pigs, who represent the Communist Party, send him to the glue factory to be turned into glue and use the money that they sold him to the glue factory with in order to buy whiskey. Folks, the Soviet Union did not send old people to be exterminated so that the party bureaucrats could buy whiskey. The Soviet Union had a lower retirement rate than the United States, lower retirement age than the United States has right now. The Soviet Union had a lower retirement age than the United States has right now. It gave a full pension to the elderly. The elderly were treated very well in the Soviet Union. Right? So the fact that they would say that in their fictional version, the Russian working class, when they get old, they get sold to the glue factory. That is so wrong and so disturbing. I mean, it is the exact opposite of what happened. The social programs, the treatment of the elderly, the pensions in the USSR were much better than what the United States has right now. So that's just a lie. But it's not a true story. It's not actually a history of the Soviet Union. It's a stupid book about barnyard animals, right? I mean, how many old folks here in the United States are struggling to get by and Social Security, they barely have it. But no, in the Soviet Union, I mean, it's just, but that's, I mean, it's awful. Why did some Ukrainians work as guards? And all right. It's like the second Ukrainian question we've gotten here. All right. Ukrainians work as guards. Alrighty. Next question. All right. Was Angela Davis a legit tankie? Yep. Angela Davis was a legit tankie. Angela Davis was the leader of the Communist Party of the United States, which was a tanky party. She visited East Germany. There's many speeches where she will go on about how great the German Democratic Republic was. Angela Davis supported North Korea. Angela Davis supported the Soviet Union. Angela Davis was the representative of American communism in the 1970s and 80s. She was the superstar of American communism. She was on Soviet TV all the time. She ran for vice president, twice, I believe. 1980, 1984, she ran for vice president on the Communist Party ticket. She was definitely a tankie. She quit the Communist Party in the early 90s. She joined committees of correspondence. I don't know exactly what she believes now. I mean, Angela Davis, she was talking about the prison industrial complex in the 90s when nobody talked about it. Now there's a lot of talk about the prison industrial complex, but she actually kind of coined the term, and prison industrial complex. She had like a CD. Do you remember CDs? She had a CD about the prison industrial complex that I got my hands on when I was in high school. I got it from the public library. One thing I'll say about Angela Davis, this is an interesting anecdote. Now, I heard this from some older lesbian activists in Cleveland, and I've always thought this is kind of a cute story. But apparently in the 1970s, Angela Davis was on a speaking tour. And again, this is secondhand, so I heard this from somebody who heard this from somebody, so if I get this wrong, this is what I heard. So, Angela Davis was on a speaking tour in the 1970s. She was on a speaking tour, and she she was speaking at I believe it was Kent State University, the version of the story I heard. And a woman got up, a gay rights activist got up, and she said, "Hey, I agree with everything that you said, and I would love to join the Communist Party, but I'm a lesbian, and I know the Communist Party has a ban on homosexual members. So what do you say to that?" And it was a provocative question, obviously. So Angela Davis replied. She said, "Well, if you are the kind of person that would put your sex life ahead of the revolution, we don't want you in the Communist Party." And then all the gay rights activists in the audience booed her, boo, and she was being booed. And that was true. The Communist Party had a ban on homosexual members up until the mid 80s, I believe. So she was booed, and that was that. What's funny is, so she quit the Communist Party in the 90s. She's a lesbian. Angela Davis is now a lesbian. Did you know that? I mean, she's a lesbian. Like, she's married to another woman, I believe. So Angela Davis, at the time that she was saying to the audience, if you would put your sex life ahead of the revolution, we don't want you in our organization. She was not simply saying that to the lesbian in the audience who asked her that. She was talking about herself, because Angela Davis was gay and is a lesbian. Now we know, Angela Davis is a lesbian. So it's kind of an interesting story that at the time that she was leading the Communist Party, she was herself gay, and made a choice not to be gay, basically, because that was not in line with the Communist Party and their beliefs. And that's pretty heavy to think about. It used to be, in the 1970s, the Workers' World Party and the International Socialists, they were pro-LGBT. But most communist parties took the position that homosexuality was what they called bourgeois decadence. And that's not a correct position. I think people should be, I'm for LGBT rights, absolutely. But that was the position. They took the position that, homosexuality was bourgeois decadence. So I read many old books from Epic China Research. You would enjoy Facing Labor Issues in China, 1934. Keep up your great talks. Don't let Slimer and his girlfriends get to you. You are way above them. Well, thank you, Nathan. Thank you very much. Wow. And thank you for that amazing super chat. And let's be in touch. I would love to stream with you sometime, Nathan. If you want to stream with me, send me a Twitter message. I will Twitter message you. Let's be in touch. Wow. And thank you for that great super chat. That's great. Thank you very much. Wow. Very good. But yeah, that's kind of a neat anecdote. But yeah, Angela Davis, apparently at the time, she was a leader of the Communist Party. She basically was in the closet, because that was their position. So there you go. Ukrainians in World War II. It's funny. Years ago, and that's the next super chat question, is, years ago, and I haven't read that book, Nathan, and I'll have to check that out. Ukrainians in World War II. Years ago, I always, I like to read, there's the people, the Jehovah's Witnesses, the religious group, they like to hand out their magazine on the subway in New York City, the Watchtower, they're the people who knock on your door. I got a copy of the Watchtower, and I was reading it on the subway. And there was a memoir of a Ukrainian SS Nazi guy in the Watchtower. And it was this guy, he had joined Hitler's SS, he was a Ukrainian, and he hated the communists. And so when the Nazis invaded the Ukraine, he joined Hitler's SS, and he was a part of Hitler's SS. But then one of the other SS men converted him to being a Jehovah's Witness. So now he moved to Argentina, and now he's a leader of the Jehovah's Witnesses in Argentina. And I remember reading this, in the Watchtower, and being like, is this for real? Is this for real? Like, does this actually say what I think it says? Like, so yeah, it was like, this guy was like, my story of, going from Ukraine to Hitler's SS to going to Argentina. But look, no, Ukraine, the collectivization, it was almost a state of civil war in the countryside, right? You talk about the kulaks, and, there was the struggle to seize control of their grain, and it was, wars tend to have two sides. And yes, there were a lot of Ukrainians who hated the communists so much, they were sympathetic to the Nazis. No one disputes that. There were a lot of Ukrainians who hated the Nazis and were big supporters of the communists. And even still today, in Eastern Ukraine, the Communist Party is very big. But hey, these things happen. There are generally two sides in wars, right? I don't know why people are so like blinded by that they can't like process that. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's like with communism, it's like, no, the communists are all bad and the anti-communists are all good. No, generally wars have two sides, Here in the United States, look, I mean, like, the Confederates took up arms in defense of slavery. In defense of slavery, they took up arms. Oh, most people I know, me, learned about Khrushchev being a great man who was progressive, even though that was all a lie. I didn't learn about Khrushchev in school at all. So there you go. But look, our Civil War, right? I mean, the Confederacy is, we the people who took up arms to preserve slavery. The Confederacy was awful. But in the United States, there is an endless amount of, there's the Gone with the Wind, which was like it's like considered one of the greatest films in American history. It's glorifying the Civil War and the South as if they're the victims, and it's like, I mean, there's many movies that have been made during, in the United States that are sympathetic to the South, right? And there's just an endless effort to try and understand how the Southern people saw it and try and make something good out of the Confederacy. I don't think there was anything good about the Confederacy. I think it was wrong. And I think the fact that, the best movie I ever saw about the American Civil War was Free State of Jones. Great movie, right? About Southern, white workers who were forced to join the Confederacy, and they realize they're fighting for the rich slave owners, so they join arm in arm with the black people and rise up. It's a great movie. If you can see Free State of Jones, that's an amazing movie. But it seems like when it comes to American history, there is this endless desire to understand, oh, there was two sides to the Civil War. And I heard this my whole life. There's two sides to the Civil War. There's two sides to the Civil War. But yet every other war in the world with communists, there's only one side, right? I mean, it's like, the Korean War, there's the evil communists, and then there's the South Koreans fighting for freedom. It's like Park Chung-hee, the brutal dictator who massacred people at Jeju Island and tortured people to death. Is he, it's like, but no. The Vietnam War, you read about, what was going on. No. It's like every war we learn about, there's only one side, except the Civil War, which, we got to bend over backwards to understand. There's such a bias. All right. Someone said all man-made systems have flaws. Yeah, that's true. No disagreement. Right? Yeah, there's going to be flaws. Yeah, I don't understand why that is. Like, is that supposed to refute communism, like, in Marxism? Like, I don't get it. Anarchists in Spain. The person is asking about the anarchists in Spain. So in Spain, in the 1930s, you had the Spanish Republic had been created, which was an elected government. A lot of communists in the Spanish Republic, they got elected, right? And they were part of the Republican government. So Franco, who was a general in the military of Spain, who was aligned with Hitler and with Mussolini, he started an insurgency, an armed rebellion against the Spanish Republic. So communists from all over the world went to Spain to fight and to defend the Republic. Now, in Spain, there were different people in the Republic, right? There were communists, right? There were social democrats. There were a lot of regular capitalists who just wanted an elected government. And in the countryside, you had the anarchists. I believe it was the Communist Party of Spain, and then you had the CNT, or the POUM, POUM, which is like the Socialist Workers' Party or something like that. They were the Trotskyites, and then you had the CTN, which was like the Trade Union Federation. That was the anarchists. So what happened was that the communists were trying to build a coalition to defeat the fascists. And Spain is a Catholic country. It is a deeply Roman Catholic country. Has been for many, thousands of years, right? It's a deeply Roman Catholic country. I think there were a lot of Muslims there at one point, but that's, that was they were pushed out. It's a deeply Catholic country. So, in the countryside, the peasants had been very brutally oppressed, very, very brutally oppressed by the landowners, right? And, as we've seen all over the world, when peasants rebel against landowners, it gets pretty ugly, right? The landowners are pretty vicious to the peasants. So when the peasants rebel, peasant rebellions tend to be pretty ugly, right? And that's true in Cambodia. That's true in Vietnam. That's true in France during the French Revolution. Peasants, when they finally start rising up, people who basically are semi-slaves, when they start rising up, they get pretty nasty. That's just a fact. So, and the Catholic Church was seen as an institution that was holding up the feudal system. There's a great 6-part documentary on the Spanish Civil War. Okay, I'll check it out. So a lot of times, these peasants that were organized by the anarchists would rise up, and there'd be a revolt in a rural area. And not only would they overthrow the local landowner, but they would kill him and cut him into pieces and rip him apart. And that's not very pleasant. And also because they saw the Catholic Church as upholding feudalism, there were times where the peasants who rose up would rape nuns, and they would execute priests and torture priests and nuns, and it was pretty awful, right? I mean, but again, this is peasants who were mad about centuries of oppression rising up. The Communist Party tried to put a stop to that and said, this is not helping, right? We're trying to build an anti-fascist coalition. We need Catholics who are anti-fascist to join us. We need capitalists. We need even some of these landowners to join us because we got to defeat Franco. So the communists were going around trying to stop the anarchists from raping priests and nuns and torturing, people to death and doing these very violent things in the countryside. That's what was going on. There was a disagreement, right? The communists were saying we need to build a united front to defeat the fascists, and we need to put the revolution on hold. After we defeat the fascists, we'll do what the Soviet Union did. We'll redistribute land, etc. The anarchists were saying that defeating the fascists and their rural revolution were one and the same. And so there was the Battle of Catalonia, in which the POUM, the Trotskyites, and the anarchists fought against the Spanish Republic. And the communists who were fighting for the Spanish Republic and the anarchists who were fighting against it killed each other. And, at the same time that everyone in the Spanish Republic was fighting the fascists, the anarchists and the communists were killing each other. And it was very awful. Now, what we know at this point, well, and you have to remember also, the Soviet Union and Mexico were the only countries in the world that aided the Spanish Republic. The United States banned any aid to the Spanish Republic under the Neutrality Act, and the whole world basically just sat back and was hoping Franco would win. Winston Churchill supports Franco. If you read Winston Churchill's histories of World War II, he writes horrendous things about the Spanish Republic. He's basically supporting Franco. And so Mexico and Mexico and the Soviet Union gave weapons and support to the Spanish Republic. No other country in the world did. There is documentation, and again, anarchists get really mad if you say this, but it's a fact that a lot of anarchists were getting support from the fascists somehow, right? They probably didn't know it, but there was covert support going to the anarchists by the fascists. And that's the term fifth column, right? Have you ever heard that term fifth column? It comes from Spain, right? That Franco was getting ready to invade Barcelona. And he said, well, I have 4 columns outside the city, but I have my 5th column in the city. And what he meant was the Trotskyites and the anarchists, right? That the Trotskyites and the anarchists, who thought they were ultra-revolutionary, were actually, they were dupes. They were a counter gang for the fascists, and they didn't know it. They were just being manipulated, right? And that this happens. This is, you talk about proxy wars and the Cold War. It's not the first place this has happened. The imperialists will use ultra-leftist elements to serve imperialism. In Angola, right? They funded Jonas Savimbi for many years. This guy who was the leader of a group called UNITA. He was a literal cannibal. He was a monster. He was a murderer, but he called himself a Maoist, right? And he fought against the MPLA. And he said, the MPLA, the ruling party of Angola, they're a bunch of Soviet puppets, but I'm the real revolutionary, right? The color revolution. It's just the same old story, right? So in Spain, the Trotskyites and the anarchists, they were being manipulated by the fascists, and they were used to weaken the Spanish Republic and help the fascists win. However, to be fair, there was kind of some people argue that the Spanish Republic, they were so afraid of being of the fascists that they toned down the revolutionary energy, and that in some ways, helped the fascists, right? That the anarchists were basically saying we need revolutionary energy to defeat Franco, and that the communists, in their effort to calm down the people, that they were, in a way, kind of killing the revolutionary energy and helped the fascists. There may be something to that argument, right? So there are different layers to these things, right? But at the end of the day, I think that the Trotskyites and the anarchists were operating as a fifth column, and they helped. Pave the way for the victory of fascism in Spain. I tend to side with the Spanish Communist Party and with the communists. I think that ultimately, raping priests and nuns, not a good thing to do. Beheading, the violent, brutal beheadings you read about, these landlords, and it wasn't helping. That they did need to build, if a fascist military dictator is trying to overthrow a government that has communists elected in it and stuff, you need to build an anti-fascist united front. But there you go. And I mean, the Spanish Republic, it's a deeply, the fact that there were like 4,000 Americans who went and fought in Spain against the fascists, they were called the Abraham Lincoln Brigades. That's amazing. That's amazing history. Norman Bethune, who's kind of a hero in China, he's a Canadian doctor. Before he went to China, he went to Spain and was a volunteer doctor to fight against the fascists. So, the Spanish Civil War, it's an important moment in the history of communism and Marxism. So there you go. All right. Why did Che Guevara not build socialism in Argentina? Well, Che Guevara, I believe, he was from a wealthy family, and he started traveling at a young age. And he was a supporter of Juan Perón, right? And Juan Perón, Peronism is very interesting. I interviewed my good friend Dakota Lilly about Peronism. Peronism is kind of a nationalistic, progressive Argentine movement. Che Guevara was a supporter of it. And what's interesting is at the time that Che Guevara died, Juan Perón said that Che Guevara was the greatest Peronist who'd ever lived. And Juan Perón was actually more sympathetic to Che Guevara at the time of his death than the Communist Party of Argentina was. The Communist Party of Argentina considered Che Guevara to be an ultra-leftist and adventurist, but Juan Perón, who was not a communist, who was a Peronist, kind of a nationalist and a progressive nationalist, Juan Perón praised Che Guevara as a great revolutionary. Peronism was the biggest movement in Latin America. Che Guevara ultimately became a communist. But then it's a little bit more complicated than that, because Che Guevara, he moved to Guatemala, right? And Che Guevara lived in Guatemala, and he was part of the Guatemalan Communist Party. And when the CIA coup happened in 1953, when Jacobo, there was a kind of a coalition government that was elected in Guatemala. Arbenz was elected president of Guatemala, Jacobo Arbenz, and he was the socialist. He was a progressive. He was kind of like a Bernie Sanders. He wasn't a communist, but he was aligned with the Communist Party. They endorsed him. He was for taxing the rich, basically making the rich pay their taxes, making United Fruit Company pay taxes and stuff, and he legalized the Communist Party. When Arbenz got elected president of Guatemala, and the CIA then had a coup and overthrew Arbenz, right? Che Guevara wanted the Communist Party of Guatemala to take up arms to defend Arbenz and to stop the military coup backed by the United States, and they wouldn't do it. So Che Guevara ripped up his Communist Party card, and he quit the Communist Party in 1953. A lot of people don't know that. And so Che Guevara, he quit the Communist Party and he moved to Mexico, and he was like on the outs with the communist movement because he thought they didn't fight back hard enough in Guatemala, and he was living in Mexico, and he met Fidel Castro. And Fidel Castro was not a member of the Communist Party. Fidel Castro had tried to lead an armed revolt in Cuba and failed, and he was in exile. And he met Fidel Castro, and Fidel Castro's brother, Raul Castro, was a member of the Communist Party. And he met Fidel Castro, and Fidel Castro said he had this plan to, launch an armed war in Cuba. And Che Guevara said, okay, I'm down. I want to join it. So, and at the time that Fidel Castro, Che Guevara, and Raul Castro, Fidel Castro's brother, went to Cuba, the Communist Party didn't support what they were doing. And Raul Castro was a member of the Communist Party, but he didn't tell the Communist Party that he was going to do the revolt. He didn't tell them, and they wouldn't have supported it, right? The Communist Party of Cuba was not in favor of an armed revolt. And, I believe it wasn't called the Communist Party, it was called the Popular Socialist Party of Cuba, but it was the Communist Party of Cuba. And they didn't support it. And, the July 26th movement led by Fidel Castro was not the Communist Party. It was a separate party. And Che Guevara had quit the Communist Party of Guatemala, And, Che Guevara, Fidel Castro were not communists. Raul was a communist, but he invaded Cuba with his brother in violation of Communist Party discipline. Fidel Castro, when he first took power, he said he didn't believe in communism. He said he believed in Jeffersonian democracy. But then he started nationalizing things. And ultimately, it wasn't until, the Cuban Revolution was in 1959. It wasn't until 1961 that Cuba announced it was a socialist society. And the Cuban Communist Party is not the party that Raul Castro was in. It's a merger. It was a merger of the July 26th movement, of the Popular Socialist Party, and of the Democratic Youth, which was an activist group on the campuses, right? So there were three parties that eventually merged into what is now the Cuban Communist Party, which is the ruling party. It's very interesting history. But yeah, you're asking why didn't Che Guevara build socialism in Argentina? I'm trying to tell you in a roundabout way that, I don't know. I mean, that Che Guevara, he was traveling and he was in Guatemala, and that everyone's path is not the same, right? People's path through life and through history, it's not like, everyone just is born in their country and does one thing, right? Look, the movement in Argentina that had a mass base was Peronism, right? The Communist Party of Argentina was never in a position to take power. They never had enough support to take power. Peronism was the movement that took power. If you were, and so, if Che Guevara was interested in, communist revolution, he was going to go to other places because the mass movement in Argentina was with Peronism. And Perón was, Juan Perón also said that Fidel Castro was a great Peronist. Peronism is it's nationalistic, it's progressive, it's not Marxist, but it's kind of socialistic. It's a strange political movement. People say it's fascism. It's not fascism. It's progressive. It's left, but it's complicated. Peronism is very strange. And Che Guevara, I think he was originally a Peronist, but he became a Marxist-Leninist, and he moved to Guatemala. So there you go. All right. And the rest is history. If there was a socialist revolution in Mexico, how should the United States react? By doing business with Mexico, by offering friendship to the Mexican people and respecting their right to self-determination. If the Mexican people would like to have socialism, the United States should respect that, right? The Mexicans don't come here and tell us what kind of system we should have, so why should we go to Mexico and tell them what they should have? You're asking me, if there were a socialist revolution in Mexico, hypothetically speaking, how would the United States react to it? Well, how should they react to it? You asked. They should react to it based on mutual respect. That's my opinion. Self-determination, right? I mean, that's pretty basic. So there you go. And it's worth noting that in Mexico right now, the president, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, they call him AMLO, he's the leader of a coalition. And part of that coalition, there is a communist party that's in the coalition. They're called the PT, or the Party of Labor of Mexico. And they're one of these, they're not the official Communist Party of Mexico. They were a Maoist, like China-aligned party, and then they were supporters of Albania, and now they're just kind of a general Marxist-Leninist party. And they are the PT, and they're the biggest communist party in Mexico, and they're part of the coalition that AMLO's in. They have a few seats in the government, and they're part of the coalition, the PT, and they're in the government there. So there you go. And it's worth noting, right? And that, again, the PT is interesting. They're an interesting party because they're basically, they're a tanky party in Mexico. They're not dogmatic. They're not stuck in the past. They have relations with Cuba, with Venezuela, with China, with, they're kind of like the Communist Party of India, Marxist. They're one of these like communist parties that's managed to kind of get their shit together and move into the 21st century. That's what we need in the United States. We don't have that in the United States, but we need something like that, right? A communist party that's not stuck in the past, that kind of moves past the 20th century confusion and becomes aligned with China and Cuba and Venezuela and all the anti-imperialist states of our time. That's what we need. That's what we need now. This is the next question. Why doesn't China aid North Korea, Vietnam, and Laos? They do. They do. China is friendly with all three of those countries. Very friendly with all three of those countries. Now Vietnam, unfortunately, there was the Kampuchea War of 1978, and there are some disputed islands, and so there has been some tension, but, Vietnam and China, in 2013, there was intense tension, but now things are better. I mean, and there is business that goes on between Vietnam and China. North Korea does a lot, but North Korea does business with China to the degree that they can. But you have to remember, China is a big supporter of the nuclear non-proliferation treaty, and North Korea withdrew from the nuclear non-proliferation treaty. And China is a Security Council member of the UN, and so China has imposed some sanctions on North Korea because they very much feel like the nuclear non-proliferation treaty should remain intact. But North Korea and China are very close. They have a good relationship. They absolutely have a good relationship. Laos is also very close to China. So saying that China doesn't aid those countries, that's simply not true. So there you go. All right. Would a socialist country want to increase the birth rates? Yes. Yes, it would. Yes, it would want to increase the birth rates. Absolutely. Absolutely. And in fact, it's funny because there's an old pamphlet by William Z. Foster where it's about syndicalism. It's kind of a socialist pamphlet from 1910. And he says that in a socialist revolutionary never has children because increasing the population under capitalism leads to greater competition for jobs and drives wages down. But after the revolution, it will be the duty of socialists to populate the earth and have as many children as possible in order to build, add labor to the overall shared surplus of the workers. I think that's kind of hilarious. But no, I mean, the Soviet Union worked very hard to increase its birth rate. If a woman had more than 10 children, they gave her a special medal called Mother of the Soviet Union. So there you go. Israel has illegal nukes. China doesn't have sanctions. Israel never signed the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, Jared. The Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, it was never signed by Israel. So they're not in violation of the treaty because they never signed it, right? North Korea did sign the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, and then they withdrew from it. And Russia and China very much want the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty to remain intact, because if it doesn't, if that treaty doesn't remain intact, at that point, the USA can start giving nukes to all its allies. And then they will have to give nukes to all of their allies. And it's the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, the Clear Skies Agreement. These things are things that prevent the Cold War from going nuts and humanity ending. So there you go, right? Now you're mentioning North Korea withdrew legally. And yes, from my understanding, you do have the right to withdraw from the Non-Proliferation Treaty. But however, the UN Security Council has felt like they need to impose penalties on North Korea for doing that. And I think that, Russia, China, these countries very much, look, keeping the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty intact is a good thing, okay? If the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty were to vanish into thin air, that would be very bad for everyone on the planet. We'd be in a lot more danger than we are, okay? North Korea, I've explained many times about why they develop nuclear weapons, and I understand their situation. But overall, I understand Russia and China's feeling that we need to keep the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty intact. The USA giving aid to Israel when Israel has violated the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, that is illegal. Well, no, Israel hasn't violated the treaty, but Israel developing nuclear weapons, and not signing the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and the USA continuing to give them aid is a violation. That's why the USA will never acknowledge that Israel has nuclear weapons. So there you go. All right. Why did some Ukrainians work as guards? Again, there were some Ukrainians who sympathized with the Nazis, who were anti-communist, right? In the 1930s, early 1930s, the collectivization, there was a lot of division in Ukrainian society about what went on. And, there are generally two sides in wars. All right, next question. Anything else people want to ask me before we go? Anything else? Anything else? All righty, folks. Thanks for tuning in. It's a pleasure to do this live. A new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression, but the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. And while the danger of a new world war still exists, the people of all countries must get prepared. Revolution is the main trend in the world today. And don't forget that we need a government of action to fight for working families.